Evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting for August 30th. You please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Deputy Clerk, can we get a roll call? Or,
Attendance.
yes, roll call for attendance.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace.
Yes.
Trustee Hardy.
Yes.
Trustee Sarso. Here. Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Ayers.
Here.
Trustee Butler.
Here.
And Mayor Karspect will not be here tonight.
Okay. Moving on to the next item, looks like the Pioneer Park Pollinator Garden presentation.
Nervous?
It's all good.
Okay, so hi, my name is Kenny Clarkson, and I am an ambassador in Girl Scouts. I am in Troop 7700, and the picture at the bottom of the screen is my troop. I am working on my Gold Award, and I'm also in the Birthday Week Advisory Commission. If any of you are like, hey, I know her.
I do.
Okay, so a Gold Award is the most prestigious award that is given in Girl Scouts. It's really similar to the Eagle Scout and Boy Scouts, if any of you are familiar with Boy Scouts. And the two main things about the Gold Award is that it must address an important issue in your community, and it has to be sustainable, and that it will continue to give to the community even after you have completed it. So the issue that I chose to address with my project is the decline in pollinator populations. There's a chart at the bottom that you can all see that just kind of helps picture how big of an issue this is and how it is a real issue. I chose this issue because pollinators are play a really big role in our ecosystems, and once they're affected, everyone is affected, including us humans. So here are some statistics that I picked out. The first one is that 90% of all plants and flowers depend on pollination. And I think this one's really important just because it shows how big of a role pollinators do play and how drastic it is that they are declining. The second statistic I have is that 1 in 3 bites of food is courtesy of pollinators. This helps to show just how important they are to us. Almost 10% of all bee populations in Europe are considered threatened, and native honeybees have experienced a 97% decrease in relative abundance, and 44% of domestic honeybee colonies were lost in 2015 to 2016. Also, a quick note, pollinators are not just bees, even though that's what we're all most familiar with, but in these pictures I have a hummingbird and a bat, but pollinators are also bees and moths and lots of birds, all that fun stuff. So why is this happening? There are a lot of causes that have affected pollinators. Two of those big ones that I chose to address are pesticides and habitat loss. There are a lot of other things such as diseases and mites, which are especially prominent in colonies. But like I said, I chose to address pesticides and habitat loss, and with habitat loss comes a lack of forage and nesting habitat, and this causes nutritional stress, and that's just that pollinators don't have food or nutrition, and that causes their numbers to deplete rapidly. And this problem of lack of forage and habitat is exemplified when combined with other causes such as pesticides and the other ones that I mentioned just previously. I decided to include 2 examples of this happening in the real world. And the first one that I have is the yellow carpet solitary bee. They live in vernal pool habitats. And so those are seasonal pools that come and go, and they harbor an immense plant and animal life, including these yellow bees. And 90% of vernal pool habitat has been lost, and most of that has been converted to agricultural land. and with more agricultural land, especially in the area that these bees are used to living, comes an increased use of pesticides and other chemicals. So when combining the loss of habitat with the use of harmful chemicals, it really starts to affect them. The second example that I have is the sunflower leaf cutting bee, and that is a bee that's pictured up in this corner. 90% of North American grasslands, which is where they are found, has been converted into agricultural use. And much like the first example that I gave, when you take away their habitat and with agricultural lands comes more pesticides and other harmful chemicals. So the project that I chose to address this issue is to create a community garden dedicated to pollinators. It will have pollinator-friendly plants, and it will also include an informational plaque. This informational plaque will help educate the community on what the issue is, what this project is, and what they can do to help. The next part of that is creating an online pledge, which community members can sign and agree to make their home gardens more pollinator-friendly. And this will result in more habitat around town, and not only from my garden, but also from other people in town, planting more pollinator-friendly gardens at home, and also a decrease in the use of harmful chemicals at my garden and also around town. And I want this page for the online pledge to reside on the town website. And here I have a lovely example of that. So here is the Town of Berthoud website, and under parks there is Pollinator Garden Pledge, and then there's a block of information at the top that talks about my project and the issue and what they can do to help, such as decrease their use of harmful chemicals at home and plant more pollinator-friendly plants. And then below that is where they can put their information and sign the pledge. This is the informational plaque that will be present at the garden that I previously mentioned, and it just has a bunch of information about the decline in pollinator populations and about pollinators and about what they can do, and this QR code takes them to the pledge on the Town of Berthoud website. And then this is the garden location. So this is right next to Pioneer Park by the community garden, and the Parks and Rec Department did give me permission to use this plot of land, and the people who take care of the community garden are aware that I'm doing this, and they have shown full support and help. So here's the landscape plan, and I think you all have a copy of it. Yeah, awesome. So you can look at it closer in detail if you want. I can imagine what it would look like, but this plan is definitely subject to change depending on what plants I can get. But this is just the general plan that I made. I think it looks pretty awesome. And next I have my budget sheet. So what I'm asking for tonight is, in order for this project to continue, and in order for me to keep making a difference, and in order for this garden and everything else to become a reality, I need help with my budget. So the most expensive things on here are the plants, which you all have a copy of the budget sheet as well. And there's a second part that goes more into detail about the plants and how I calculated that. And then the other biggest thing on here is soil materials. And it comes out to a grand total of just under $2,500. All right, next I have my timeline. This is also subject to change depending on how much you guys can help me tonight and also what other hurdles I come across. But I will present it to the town tonight, and then I hope to prepare soil, gather materials, and plant the garden in September and have a little opening ceremony in October. Okay, that's the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any of the trustees have any questions?
Is
parks going to take over this after the creation? Who's gonna, I guess, keep it up?
Yeah, so like I said, for the sustainability part, I have been in contact with the Parks Department, and they will be taking care of watering and pruning the plants and weeding and all of that stuff.
Any questions?
Where would this funding come out of?
That depends. In general, we work with, scouts on Eagle projects and projects like this, Way Girl Scouts, whichever. And we typically provide a location and logistical support, but we don't typically provide funding.
Mhm.
So we don't have a pot of money aside from our regular landscape budgets that we might pull from to do that.
Would that be problematic?
Only in the sense that it may create a precedent or expectation for future projects that might be challenging. Because we don't have a kind of a policy per se that might control how that happens in the future. Doing that on a one-off basis can be an interesting challenge. But beyond that, I don't know if that would be a problem per se.
What about the ongoing maintenance? How does your staff feel about maintaining the garden?
I think that is a pretty simple thing for us to do. I mean, in the context of Pioneer Park, it's already a pretty significant maintenance effort. This actually, I don't think will be a significant maintenance burden for staff. We've talked about it a little bit. It shouldn't be an issue. So, we'll need to modify the irrigation system a little bit, do some of that stuff in order to prepare it. But that should be easy enough.
I actually had a question for you regarding the plants. Are those all actual pollinators? They're not invasive, they're not problematic, they're well-behaved plants for the most part?
Yep, and they're all water-based plants, so they don't take too much water.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Another quick question, just to tack on to that. I'm familiar with all these plants, save for the chocolate flower. Where does that originate from? You can tell me a little bit
I am
about
not
that.
completely sure. Not all of them are originally from North America or like Colorado specifically. But all of them are non-invasive. I'm not completely sure where it comes from, but
Okay.
yeah.
Well, you said the right words, that it's not invasive, so I appreciate that.
Okay. So no other questions, I guess, what's everybody's thoughts? Something we should have staff look at and see if we could do? Or what's everybody thinking?
I personally love the idea, and I think it's really amazing that you're introducing it. And I think I just would like to see us work out a way of setting more of a standard that when someone comes to us with an idea, maybe the town is a sponsor or one of the sponsors, and we encourage others to step up to help sponsor. But I'm nervous about saying yes because it feels like I am worried that every project there will be a precedent, and how do we say yes or no when I'm going to want to say yes to all of them because this is amazing, right? And so I want to know how we can support it and then help market it, maybe to say, hey, the town is supporting the Girl Scouts in this with $1,000 or something, maybe smaller, or we want to sponsor, help be a sponsor, and we'd like other people to step up and maybe other plant lovers in the community to market their business even on it. I don't know. Does that resonate with anybody else?
Yeah, to tack onto that, have you explored other avenues of funding? You've got several cost options obviously on here. Who have you reached out to, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I've reached out to quite a few people. A lot of them didn't respond, but Alpine Gardens has been willing to donate a few plants, but obviously I need a lot more than just a few. And then I will be presenting to North American Beekeepers Association. Northern Colorado Beekeepers Association this week, and hopes of getting some funding from there too.
That's awesome. You've done a great job. This is a really cool project.
Awesome job. And I really like the fact that this kind of, I think, spawns off a little bit of our pollinator pledge that we put in a couple years ago. getting the pledge actually on the website would be a nice addition, not only to her presentation. I kind of view this as the town park's got a free landscape architect, and then the town gets to design something based on her free design. I also view it as kind of a nice model for our development code that is now activating the addition of promoting pollinator gardens within the new developments that are being built in the community. So I think it would serve a lot of purposes besides just being a nice pollinator garden and a Girl Scout Eagle or a Gold Award project through the Boy Scout. So I think there's a lot of value in this, in addition to just it being a pollinator garden and a project and a scout project. So I think it's a win-win for everybody all the way around.
Yeah, and I agree with that, especially, I mean, your comment about not having to now field all of the proposals. Yes, I have that fear as well. However, this seems to be in line with basically everything that the town is doing right now and all of the things that we're forcing the developments to do as well. So it's not like this is just someone asking for money to do to do this thing. It seems like it is in line with the policies that we've all agreed upon and set up.
I think that's a fair point.
Any thoughts on your end, Trustee Butler?
Well, great presentation. And as just to echo the other trustees, I'm a little torn with, as Administrator mentioned, the precedent that we might be setting, but this is in full alignment with a lot of the town's initiatives and efforts at the moment as well. A couple more questions with, I'm not completely familiar with Town Park or the community garden. How is that managed and maintained between the community versus Parks Department? Is there already irrigation systems there installed? I mean, how does this?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I'll try to give you the brief summary. So the community garden in Pioneer Park is managed by Birth and Local, which is a local nonprofit. And 2 years ago, I don't know, maybe less than that, maybe more than that. We entered into basically a no-cost lease agreement with them to lease that ground and take care of it. We made some irrigation changes. We've helped them plant trees, but they went out and received the funding for all those, and then we've made some adjustments to the irrigation to take them off of our system and separate them off of our system so they can control watering times. And like I said, I think we assisted with planting the trees they got grant funding for. Outside of that, it's fully managed and maintained by Birth and Local.
So how would this coordinate with that?
This is actually outside of that boundary. At least I'm fairly confident of this, yeah. This is outside of their leased boundary, so this would be immediately adjacent to it, but it wouldn't impact the area that they have some operational control over.
And the town would water? and
Yeah,
maintain?
we would take care of watering and maintenance of this pollinator garden.
Okay, it doesn't interfere with the community garden?
Shouldn't.
Okay, so logistically it works. So we're really just getting down to funding and policy.
Yeah, I think practically speaking, I think the idea is great. We have no issue maintaining it in the long run. The question is, does the board want to support it financially?
Could we view
And,
this
and,
as
and again, that would be a little bit of a departure for how we've done things in the past.
could we view this as not necessarily we're funding her directly, but it's more or less she came to us with an idea and we're implementing an idea at what would normally be an expense to the town parks for putting flowers in like the roundabout at the main entrance in the community and all the other plantings that we do around the community. It's kind of blended in with that whole budget, and so it's just kind of another area that would have normally been developed had she not presented her idea on how to lay it out.
I think we, and by we, I mean the town board, can take whatever approach you want in that regard.
I'm just trying to eliminate the precedence part.
Yeah. Maybe an easier thing to just provide plants and, prep the irrigation system and do some of those things. And actually, I don't know the answer to this question, only because I've only been involved peripherally, but is the plan to have volunteers come and plant the garden, lay down the mulch and all that stuff?
Yeah, I already have quite a few people who have shown interest in volunteering. I know a lot of high school seniors who still need volunteer hours.
And you didn't get them to sign up with the youth advisory yet?
No. Yeah, and the group of people that manage the community garden, I talked to them last year, I think, and they said that they also would like to help building it and planting plants.
And her building a page on the website's been approved, or is that up to us to say, yeah, we want that too?
I think that's something we can do, and I think that doesn't cost us anything, it just takes a little bit of time.
Sure.
And certainly, I think is in support of the pollinator resolution that the board adopted a couple years ago. Supporting the establishment of more pollinator gardens and supporting pollinator species. This project is certainly in line with all of those things.
Sure.
And maybe one more question from my perspective, Ken. Is there a certain amount of funding you're asking for? Or are you asking for funding for the entire amount? Or is there like a threshold where like we could do a portion of, or just out of curiosity?
I think whatever would in your interest best, or whatever you think would be easiest funding as possible. Like I said, I do have a few backups who would be willing to give funding, or I can try and get some funding from.
Sorry, just kind of weigh in on this as well. Anybody who's gone through Girl Scouts to get a gold, or Eagle Scouts and gotten your Eagle, probably the most terrifying part of the whole thing, other than having to present it, is also to ask for funding. To that end, I think there are worse precedents to set than trying to help out your community with your community funds. While I understand that setting a precedence for we'll fund every single thing that happens in town can lead to a bad rabbit hole, I think within reason, there could be something we could figure out. I would hate for the town to not be a resource that our seniors who volunteer their time can no longer turn towards on a regular, or at least a somewhat understood basis, is my personal belief on this.
I agree. I want to make sure that we create the environment where they feel like they can continue to come before the board and partner with the town and feel heard and seen. So that is important. And you're right, it takes a lot of courage, and we're definitely not going to miss that. So is there a reasonable amount of time we could say try to attain funding, and whatever deficit is left that we can try and make up the remainder? Or help find a way to, or maybe take time to see if we can help her get more funding. I don't know. Whatever is most reasonable for you.
Maybe I'll just
Good
suggest
connections.
this. And I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not, but maybe we just, so that she knows what her target is as well, we could fund the purchase of the plants, for instance. So that there's kind of a clear, whatever that takes. I know that plan is a little flexible, right, depending on what's available at the nursery and kind of how that plan shakes out, but that we would fund the purchase of the plants. And then that would give her a clear target. We can support with the irrigation system changes and those kinds of things too, so that's not a big heavy lift. We're gonna have to do that anyway in order to make this work.
Okay.
If the board would be supportive of that.
And what about town staff that's in the Parks Department?
They're gonna support this
Well, I know, but I
logistically
mean,
anyway a little
They
bit.
have their budget, so it's kind of like, would it come out of their budget or would it come out of a general fund? I'm just kind of like,
Well, their budget is the general fund,
Yeah.
so it'll come out of the general fund.
So as an Eagle Scout myself, and my project was actually a conservation project as well, I really want to thank you for your service to our community, and I think this project is excellent, and I'm open to either. I'm certainly open to entertaining a policy to formalize this,
Yeah.
but I think we can
Budget
move
limit.
forward tonight. I'm open to entertaining how much we want to fund from the board perspective. Sure.
I would vote to fund the whole thing just because of the nature of it. But if that's uncomfortable for some, then I'm willing to set boundaries as well. So
I'd be up for her to encourage her to look for additional funding sources, and then maybe the town picks up the balance that finishes the project.
Trustee Butler, you're
I agree with that. I think we should set some limit to, capping the town's budget for, I think, identifying specifically for plant cost.
Yep.
'Cause that's easy to basically put in the scope of the Parks Department anyways to provide plans to create pollinator gardens. So to have the assistance in this project and all that just makes a lot of sense. So that's how I lean towards this.
Okay, so it sounds like everybody's supportive of funding to a degree and also possibly pursuing some kind of precedence where if an individual comes to us to volunteer but also asking for funding, we have a policy or some kind of groundwork in place, so it's not a blanket yes or no? That kind of an agreement? Did you need any other
I
kind
think
of?
that's pretty clear.
Cool. Well, there we go. So I take it staff will be in touch with Kenyon here with how things will be moving forward, or?
Yeah, if you guys, if somebody wanted to make a motion about supporting that financially in maybe the way that Tim described, but you guys vote, so we have that on the record. That makes it easier for us in the future too.
Are we,
This is a special meeting, so you have the ability to vote.
okay, just making sure. Did anybody want to make a motion for that, or know how to start that?
I can try. I would move to approve funding that assists with any,
Write it down and that's it.
gosh, I had it. I move to approve any excess funding needed for the pollinator garden project, once other fundraising is complete. Is that somewhat?
sounds-
That's the trick for me.
That sounds reasonable.
I have a
And is that
question. Do you
up
want to set a
to
time
including the
limit?
total cost of the garden? Just sort of-
Do we want
Up
to
to
put
what was
Yeah.
requested by the presenter, which was $2,000 some dollars.
Do you want to set a time limit on that? Since this is kind of a time-sensitive fall project?
What would be fair?
Well, the timetable puts it somewhere into October where everything is complete.
So end of September?
By the end of September.
2022.
That's the worst motion ever.
We stumbled it through. We'll get it together. Does that sound presentable?
I think that's clear enough.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by trustee Sorcelli, a second by trustee Ayers. Can we get a roll call vote?
Mayor Pro Tem Grace,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Sarasota,
Yes.
trustee Butler.
Yes.
All right. Well, you got a motion on a special meeting.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item, item 5, the mosquito spraying discussion introduced by Town Administrator Kirk.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Grace. As you know, 2 Fridays ago, we applied adulticide for mosquitoes as a result of a high vector index in our trap and test data for mosquitoes and West Nile virus. That spurred a conversation about the town's mosquito spraying policy and how that should be applied in the future. As you know, I think from the prior discussion that we had at the last meeting, the town had adopted a policy in 2017 via resolution to control for vector-borne diseases from mosquitoes. That's its primary purpose is not a mosquito spraying policy for nuisance in any way. Since that time, this last spray was the first time we've sprayed, so in approximately 6 years. In 2018, though, the board did vote to suspend mosquito spraying for the remainder of that season, with the intent that a policy discussion be brought back that fall, specifically in October of 2022. The motion was really explicit about that, which was 2018, sorry, thank you, Trustee Hardy, which was a little bit of a surprise to me in retrospect. I'm not sure why, but that never came back. Mayor Karspek asked about that at the last meeting. I have my own theories about why, but the short answer is that never came back in front of the board and never needed to because our vector index never went above the 0.5 threshold that was set in that 2017 policy until very recently, when it was a little over 1.1, which is very high. You guys know all that, and so you all requested that we bring this back to you to have a conversation about what the policy should be, whether or not we should continue our current practice or whether or not there should be a modification to that practice and policy. Tom Gonzalez, who's the Director of Public Health here in Laramie County, and a couple of his team members are here. I've asked Tom to just give a kind of a brief overview. I think it's probably about 5 minutes, but just, what are we talking about? A lot of those conversations happened long before really anybody but Trustee Hardy on this board was a part of the board. And so, what is West Nile virus? What does vector index even mean? Sometimes I think we talk about those terms as if everyone understands what we're saying, and I think the answer is probably that they don't. So at least starting there, and then getting some feedback and discussion from you tonight about, what problems do we want to solve with any policy changes that we might address. So with that, if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to Tom.
Sure.
And we can go from there.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and trustees. Tom Gonzalez, Public Health Director, Laramie County Department of Health and Environment. I do have two of our staff here, Dr. Jared Olson, who is our Senior Population Epidemiologist, and Erica Cathay, who is our Office Manager for our Communicable Disease and Emergency Preparedness Program. So as Town Administrator Clark said, it's been a while since we've been here, since about 2018, the last time we presented in front of this board, and we appreciate the opportunity to come back, talk a little bit about West Nile virus and kind of the 101 with that. So we'll got a 5-minute presentation here, and then we're here for any questions that you may have. So let's see if I can do this right. So real quick, what is West Nile virus and how is it transmitted? As you see on this pretty good cycle graph here, the vector of West Nile virus is the mosquito. Birds are the amplifying host, typically are COVID birds. Let that one go. Been a long 2 years. Corvids, and they amplify that mosquito. So that's why typically the virus, that's why it's typically later in the season as it gets amplified to the end host, which happens to be humans and horses. As Dr. Olson talked a little bit about, the symptoms vary, but about 20% of the population that is exposed by a mosquito by carrying West Nile virus will show severe symptoms of headache, high fever, disorientation, coma, trauma, tremors that lead to more of an encephalitis situation. That could be for many weeks or even long-lived to death. The majority of that 20% have what they call the fever, West Nile virus fever, but they have a strong fever, headache, malaise, they have body aches, etc., that can last for several weeks and can have long-term effects as well. About 80% of the population is asymptomatic, does not show symptoms. But I think that's important as we set it off, that it's really the vector here. We've got about 20 different mosquitoes in this region. It's 2 mosquitoes, and you'll hear a lot about them. They're the Culex species, the Culex tarsalis and the Culex pipian. So when we're doing our mosquito trapping and work with Colorado State University, as well as the City of Fort Collins and Town of Berthoud, City of Loveland, we're primarily focusing on those 2 specific mosquitoes because they're the ones that transmit the virus, where the other 18 do not. So with that, I'll turn over to Dr. Olson to continue the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees. My name is Jared Olson. I'm the Senior Population Epidemiologist for Laramie County Department of Health and Environment. So just to echo a little bit what Tom was talking about here, for the majority of folks, 8 in 10 folks will never know that they have contracted this particular virus from a mosquito bite. As you can imagine, most of those cases are not identified. Blood donors are sometimes identified, maybe somebody else in the family who gets testing afterwards. About 20% of the cases will develop symptoms, including fever. There can be other symptoms associated with that, including fatigue that lasts for weeks or months. And then less than 1%, about 1 out of 150, folks will develop serious, severe illness, including sometimes fatal encephalitis or meningitis, so swelling of the brain or swelling of the tissues around the spinal cord and the brain. And there's particularly greater risk of severe illness for those over 60 years of age, as well as those who have compromised immune systems, cancer patients, transplant patients, things like Okay, so we were hardest hit in 2003, so very early on. This really predates most of the monitoring and mitigation practices within the state of Colorado. There were over 60 deaths within the state of Colorado that year, thousands of cases. There has been active monitoring and mitigation since 2003, particularly in those counties that are more likely to have consequences for this. So last year we had 175 reported cases. Of course, that is a massive underreport, just mostly symptomatic cases, and as well as 11 folks who passed due to West Nile virus. So about half of the cases that were reported were neuroinvasive, so were that more severe category. And that's similar so far in 2022. Okay, so just a little bit of sense of what we're looking at here from the monitoring practices. So there are traps, light traps all over the county, run by a combination of municipalities as well as contracted agencies for this monitoring with testing for the presence of disease by CSU. So assessing whether or not the DNA from that virus, from the West Nile virus, is present in the mosquitoes there. You can see on this here we have a breakdown from a particular trap in Berthoud from the 23rd of the different species of mosquito, and we're really concerned with that Culex, those two varieties there, which did account for the majority in this particular trap. That plays into the vector index along with the presence of the disease in the association there. Some municipalities have set their certain thresholds for adulticide. Some municipalities use larvicide in order to try and keep the vector index from reaching that point. Other municipalities and counties may use other integrated pest management approaches in order to try and reduce the possibility that you have a vector index that exceeds 0.5 or 0.75 or 1. So just a little bit about where does this vector index come from and what's its relevance here. So we have some associations here by county in the literature coming out from 2013 or so. So this won't have our most recent years, but some of those key 10 years post the introduction to West Nile in Colorado. So each of those little boxes there are the samples by week, as well as the next week's human cases. So you can see an association between, as the vector index rises, especially in our most populated counties, Laramie, Boulder, Weld, Jefferson, Pueblo, Denver, those folks, an association between a higher vector index and an increase in the number of identified human cases. So some of the complications we're going to see moving forward is as more folks are exposed to West Nile virus, you're going to see higher levels of immunity. So once you have immunity, if you're not immunocompromised, you probably will not have future problems with West Nile virus, so you may not be symptomatic even if you were symptomatic the first exposure. It is a little bit different than it is with COVID or influenza in that the vector is the mosquito itself. So it doesn't, for a susceptible person, someone who's at high risk, it doesn't necessarily matter if the folks that are around them have had some level of immunity, because really it's the mosquito and the environment that the mosquito is developing in that's of most concern. We may very well continue to see an increase in some of the challenges associated with controlling this particular disease, as well as the mosquitoes that are the vector. Increases in drought are associated with increased frequency of detecting the disease among the species of mosquito. So you might have, in drought conditions, you might have the same number of mosquitoes or even fewer mosquitoes, but you might be more likely to have a higher risk of having those mosquitoes carry the West Nile virus. Certainly weather conditions obviously promote mosquitoes. Also may come from certain habitats that may be subject to some mitigation. You may have wetlands that can be rehabilitated and that can reduce the risk of mosquitoes through rehabilitating that particular food web and natural predators that consume those. And there's some municipalities that have taken that route as part of the mitigation strategy. But once you get above 0.5 for the vector index, you're likely to see human cases, and once you're above 1, you're likely to see enough human cases that you may consider that to be an epidemic. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the trustees and to Tom for any questions.
Okay, so I started right to left last time, left to right, I guess, this time. Trustee Butler, any questions?
This whole topic is a little out of my wheelhouse of specialty. But as I have been trying to get up to speed lately, a lot of the contentions seems to come down to how to treat or manage. Proactively with the larvicide, or with the adulticide, after these vector index levels reach higher. Does Laramie County or you guys have any advice or guidance on which effectives are more effective?
Yeah, you use a combination of those approaches. What we see the most success is a very active early on larvicide program where you've identified high areas of mosquito breeding based upon the Culex breeding ground and continuing that through the season. I understand Bertha does that and has been very effective. That's probably one reason we haven't been here since probably around 2018. Unfortunately, due to the extreme conditions this year with the high heat, and then we get the rain, and it's not cooling off at night. And the Culex really likes that. It likes the warmer, stagnant waters. That's why we don't typically see it up in the mountains where it cools off at night. So I think those combinations was the reason we had a vector index over 1. But for all intents and purposes, your program, your complete program seems to be working. You haven't had to apply adulticide near as much as other communities, which is a success to your program. But to answer your question, one that we see a holistic approach where they use larviciding as well as different environmental methods, and in cases when the vector index gets over a certain threshold established by their governing board, it then would be adulticide.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Trustee Hardy, or do you want us to come back to you?
I only have comments, no questions.
Trustee Ayers?
Yes, could you, off the top of your head, give me an example of some other virus or some other disease that has the same percentages of 20% serious illness versus 80% not so serious or non-existent?
I'll turn that over to Erica for that. I think she has a grasp than I would.
Hi.
Kathy, Communicable Disease and Emergency Preparedness at the Health Department. It's a great question, and I've got COVID brain as well, just thinking of a disease that can cause asymptomatic infections, range from asymptomatic all the way to severe illness and death. Jared would probably be better on the data as far as specifics, but yeah, I think West Nile virus, definitely, we detect a lot of cases in blood donors. That's how we know it's quite prevalent and asymptomatic. And then on the other end, we've got cases, unfortunately, that have more the long-term illness and effects from that. So it's a wide spectrum.
Okay. You may have answered this in your presentation, so I apologize. What is the incubation period of the larvae between being babies to being able to spread the disease?
But I don't know that one, but it does occur multiple times throughout a season. So that would be probably best oriented to somebody who's more in the integrated pest management field. But what we do see is the buildup over the season, right? So early on, if there is the presence of West Nile, it may be in very small quantities, but then through the amplification of the host, so the birds basically, they have enough viral material in their bloodstream that's how additional adult mosquitoes may pick up the virus and be able to transmit it to others. That does not occur in humans, so it is not drawn from a human and passed to another human in that particular way.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a relatively short period of time between larvae and adults. And you will see with the Culex, you'll see adults tending to stay relatively close to the larval pools, which is a bit of a difference between your other mosquito types, which may travel pretty large distances. So there may be some geographic association that you can exploit in order for prevention as well.
Okay. A follow-up question on that, and once again, I apologize if this is an incorrect question for you. What is the lifespan of a Culex mosquito?
I don't know what the life has been.
Okay. And if they have the virus there, they have it for their, I assume, for their entire lifespan.
Yeah, it would be a risk factor at least, yes.
Okay. And I think my final question is, at the vector index graph that you showed, have you seen or is there empirical differences between municipalities or regions that do the adult spraying versus the larvicide in the vector index?
So, yeah, so I don't know of the specifics of all of the municipalities or counties and how they're administering both the larvicide and the adulticide. Typically, the adulticide is only used once the vector index is exceeded in order to prevent additional cases that are identified. Usually, the larvicide approach is what is used in order to prevent the index from going up. So I don't know, and I think part of what the challenge here is in different places you're going to have different strategies that may work best for those particular communities. And in some of the communities where you have very low population densities, there may be very little cause for this particular course of action. In some places where you have higher densities or higher risk environments for this particular mosquito, there may be more cause for that. And as I said, that can take the combination of mitigation of the environment to make it less conducive for that particular mosquito through larvicide all the way.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Murphy, any questions?
Yeah, regarding the testing process, I would like to know just how you guys go through the process from taking the traps out in the field to having your results.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee. That's a great question. So around the testing, that is a collaboration with Colorado State University and the contractor of EDCI. So as Jared said, there's well over 50 traps throughout the county. I believe 5 in the town of Berthoud. Those are managed by the contractor on a weekly basis. Those results are then submitted to Colorado State University, where they run the specific tests on the 2 Culex to determine if they are positive carrying the West Nile virus. So, and then that process gets to us early Monday, and we determine the vector index based upon those results that come into us weekly.
And I was wondering, in addition to that, regarding the testing stations, is there a reason or a rhyme to the quantity and the placement?
There is. They put a lot of strategy into it. And as Dr. Olson was saying, we've got pretty good data going back to 2003 when it hit this community pretty hard, where specifically to put them near water, near parks where they can be safe so people aren't tampering with them. So there's quite a bit of strategy in how the distance and those things. And they typically, if we find that one is not a very good trap site, they'll look for another trap site. So we've got about 15 years of identifying good trap sites. And so the locations throughout the town seem to be pretty strategic and thoughtful through the last 5 to 10 years.
And I guess one more question. I want to thank you for sending the info. I requested by email that Mr. Gonzalez send some background on why Larimer County has this policy. My last question was referencing the study that it seems the policy is based on, which was, let me see if I get this right, predicting human West Nile virus infections with mosquito surveillance data. I read through it. Granted, I'm not a scientist. I got some help from my wife who is. But just reading the study, it seemed towards the end that they recommended that for managing the vector index, that there was some wiggle room between 0.5 and 1 on how that actually occurs and whether it's worthwhile or not. The numbers somewhere in there. Could you maybe explain on that?
Thank you, Trustee, and I applaud you for reading that full. It's a really well-written study. And I'll have Dr. Olson come up in more, but that has been a great debate. And the city of Fort Collins spent quite a couple years with an technical advisory group that reviewed that data, and they went back and forth, and they landed right in the middle of 0.75. And based upon that study, based upon some other studies as well, what they did put in there as a unique part is when they do get to 0.5 in an area, they do door hangers. They'll go door to door. They work through communications. We support them in those efforts to at least let the community know, hey, you're at an elevated area, range with the vector index. And then if they do see a 0.75, that's when they act. So that's what they decided through their policy process, but I can certainly have Jared talk specific on the study itself.
Yeah, I mean, all this is giving you an approximation of what you may anticipate as far as human cases, right? So it doesn't necessarily tell you about the severity of those cases. It doesn't tell you necessarily guarantee how many cases there will be, and it certainly doesn't tell you what the trade-off should be for your particular community. But there is, once you have over one, you're likely to see a cluster of human cases. And I do think, there is this concern I'll speak for myself. I have a concern about what happens if we are a little bit, if we're failing to kind of consider the severity of this, if there's enough amplification that the growth is at such a rate that we see many human cases before we're able to take action, right? Because once it's amplified within the environment, that's when it could get scary, like 2003. So far, there have been pretty robust mitigation and monitoring efforts in place. Certainly, we would not want it to get back to that 2003 place. But between here and there, I think there's a lot of room for reasonable interpretation and choice.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And if I may add too, another piece of the conversation was if we see them at 0.75, but we look, then the city Fort Collins may look at the weather forecast. If you see it's getting later in the season and the nights are going to get lower in temperature, we may have cooling off, they may want to wait a week. We support their efforts when they're putting good science and thought to it. So it isn't black and white in some way. We work with all of our municipalities and strategize on the best approach, weighing the risk. If there is a good chance that Thursday night is going to dip low, cooler, and the breeding may go down, we can watch it. And that has worked. In some cases it hasn't, but we honor that thought process. So again, it isn't really just black and white.
Thank you.
What is that temperature?
50.
Typically, when you drop below 60 degrees, multiple nights. You got to have a couple of nights. And it might be right, it's 58 or 60 degrees, right around there.
Get into the low 50 even more so.
Yes, thank you. So you start getting down below 58, 55, you were probably going to be in a good situation where this summer we haven't seen, unfortunately, dipping below there at all. And that's probably why we're seeing high vector index around the county, the last batch we got.
Good, there we go. Trustee Sorcelli, any questions?
I just want a little bit of clarification on the process because this is a little bit new for me too. When the vector indexes are coming up high, you guys are just making suggestions to a municipality. You guys aren't, county doesn't do any other pesticide approaches on their own, do they? Or is it strictly each city is making that decision independently?
I appreciate that question. That's a good clarifying question, Trustee. We work with all the municipalities, certainly the ones that have the programs. And we kind of throughout in the off season, we just discuss where we're at in their plan. Unincorporated county, yes, then we will spray if we reach that vector index. The health department covers that through the contractor to do the spraying. If it got to a level, a situation where municipality wasn't, and we're well over one, and we had human cases, at that point we'd have a heart-to-heart conversation that we've got to do something. To make sure we're not amplifying the virus to get to a point. But where we've been at, the process has been a recommendation. Once we get over one, it's a strong recommendation to go to the adult society based upon what we're seeing with the vector index.
And then to clarify, what's the vector index for county spraying to occur?
0.5 is where we've been at based upon the study. The city of Fort Collins is 0.75. Loveland does a much different tactic. They spray a little bit more, and then our smaller municipalities, they basically just count the number of Culex mosquitoes. They get over a certain threshold, they'll spray within a mile radius. That's 10 minutes Loveland and Johnstown. So that's a much lower vector index. It's usually around, what do we see, about 0.3 for that, typically. It's more city of Fort Collins and town of Berthoud that use that vector index of 0.5 to 0.75.
So Fort Collins and Berthoud are taking a different approach.
I'm sorry?
The Fort Collins and Berthoud are taking a different approach than some of our other neighboring cities.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's basing it on the vector, whereas the other cities are doing it based on the Culex index.
They just look at just the number of mosquitoes.
Oh, I
And then
see.
some look at then how many of the mosquitoes are positive.
I see. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Good information. Just to clarify, does the county itself spray, or does that just kind of, if it's county property, the county will spray?
Correct. Yeah.
Just to kind of pivot, in terms of what is sprayed, is that something that we would be able to discuss with you tonight as well?
You sure can.
Okay. Having not been a part of this discussion in 2017, 2018, could you kind of, I guess, brief us on what is sprayed and how that whole process goes about?
Yep.
Sure. So the adulticide is what the contractor calls an ultra low dose, ultra low volume of permethrin. It's also combined with another agent that doesn't allow the mosquitoes to or other insects to break down the permethrin compound internally, so that it will kill them. So it is something that is not specific to mosquitoes, but does affect all insects. There are also some concerns about household pets, specifically cats, and their exposure to it, less so dogs. There is information on permethrin exposure in the literature, and that class of compounds. It's something that's it's a man-made compound that's derived from the chrysanthemum plant. Most of our information comes from animal models in which animals are given very high doses of it, sometimes daily for a year. There are some biological consequences for those high doses. In the circumstances that we're talking about, it's obviously much lower doses, and I think it's unclear if there's any exposure to humans if you're indoors and if your windows are closed. The half-life is relatively short for this type of compound and can break down in sunlight and in water.
So short half-life of a day, a week?
It may be days. It's certainly not as long as some of our other longer-standing pesticides. It's hard to say. It can bind to soil, so if it binds to soil, it's going to last longer. If it's suspended in the air, the type of compound that's sprayed, I don't know that I can tell you exactly how long it's going to be around for, but it's not necessarily something that 2 weeks later you would be concerned about being in your environment. And as a parent and somebody who lives in Fort Collins, when their spraying occurs, I don't think much about it the next day.
Okay. I've lived in Fort Collins when they would spray down College that whole time too. It looked really weird just seeing a truck. It looked like Vape Nation was on the backside of it. I had a question, I lost it, sorry. Anybody have questions?
I have a
Yes.
further question now. In 2003, during the initial pretty serious problem, how was that outbreak? How was that outbreak curbed?
So there are no treatments, medications, vaccines available for West Nile virus. So my understanding in 2003.
Yeah, I was with the county health department at the time. So in 2003, it did become a public health emergency. And at the time, Dr. Adrian Lavallee worked with CDC to do actual aerial adulticiding of the whole county through CDC in an emergency process. And that was the way we were absolutely able to get the mosquito population down. But what had happened is West Nile virus was first found in New York in the late 90s, and we watched it slowly progress across the country, and then it hit Colorado that end of 2002. There were some cases, but mainly 2003, and Laramie County was really the epicenter with Robb County as well. But the way at that time was in late August, it was aerial adulticiding.
Okay.
Did it work?
And it did, but at that time, that kind of adulticiding, you're probably impacting your pollinators and those things. That's why this approach, they're at night when most of our pollinators are not out. Here the dragonflies still can be an issue, but your bees and others should be tucked away, so it does not impact them near as high as if you're doing it during the day. that's certainly aerial. But yes, to answer your question, that certainly stopped at least the transmission from the mosquitoes.
Is there somewhere on the website that those chemicals are listed out that's being placed in the adult pesticides that people can research?
Are you, the actual ultraviolet? Is it on the
Yes.
website?
Yes.
Yes, it's on the City of Fort Collins, but we can certainly make sure you get that information.
Yeah, that's something that I've had a few people ask me, and I just I don't like not being able to answer it, or at least point them to the answer if I don't have it.
Yes,
That
we'll
would
get
be
you all that information, what is exactly used, what's the level, those things, how
That would be
they actually use a fine mist fog, all that's within that information.
That would be wonderful.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other final questions? All right, switching it over to comments. Just want to start on this side. You have more time to
Public
think.
comment first, or our
Are
comments?
we doing public comments for a special meeting, or is
You
that,
absolutely can.
is that something the board would want to do, public comments?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, I guess we'll open up for public comments. Is there anybody listed, I guess? We wouldn't have had a sign up
I
sheet.
don't think we had a sign-up sheet, so.
Okay. All right, if anybody would like to speak, if you want to come on up, usual MO, just name and address. Okay. Maybe,
Possibly two.
maybe, all right. Okay, so can you state your name and your address, please?
I will. Jeff Hyndman, 348 Turner Avenue. Thanks to you guys for serving and dealing with difficult issues. Been there, done that. Really glad to see there's 3 Eagle Scouts still on the board, unless maybe you have 4. So, but that's awesome. Anyway, I think it's really appropriate or ironic that the meeting started with a presentation on a pollinator garden, which we've worked really hard in the past 6 years to get pro-pollinator policies. So, just started my 3 minutes, so I will try to be brief. So, contrary to staff's interpretation, 2017 was not the latest policy decision by the board. And since I was on the board in 2018, I know that very well. I personally can't believe that I didn't realize it didn't come back to us in October so that we could resolve it, because that certainly was the intent. But not only did we suspend spraying in 2018, we raised the threshold to 0.75. I realize some of the traps were over that in this instance, but for the staff on 48 hours notice to completely change a policy of no spraying for 5 years with very poor communication to the public was just absolute travesty. So at the 2018 meeting, Katie O'Donnell from the health department stated that 0.75 was the Laramie County threshold. So I'm not sure why that's gone down to 0.5 in the last 5 years. But anyway, I see 3 major problems. There's tons of problems, as you saw from my emails, but the 3 major problems are the lack of notice and really poor communication, misinformation given to citizens. I ran into an ex-trustee this weekend at City Star, and I said, hey, what did you think about the spraying? And he's like, what spraying? So I guarantee you there were hundreds, if not thousands of people that did not know this was happening, left their cats outside, they have chickens and ducks, have organic gardens, they have the windows open, you know, when the nights are cool as they are now. Lots of people, like myself, sleep with my windows open. I happened to be out of town, and fortunately I was just lucky to have service for a few hours and was able to alert my house sitter to cover our garden. Anyway, the second major issue is ignoring private property rights. For the government to come in and spray chemicals on a private property without the owner's consent, that is just ridiculous. And I am stunned at how many questions the health department could not answer from the board tonight. So we don't know the half-life of this chemical that we're spraying. It kills every bug. Anyway, and the third is environmental impacts. I sent you guys some videos that it took me a while to find before the meeting, but 2017 I covered my front bed with plastic, and in the morning I went out to clean it up, and I took videos. Every single flying insect that was in the air when that truck went down the road is dead and twitching and spinning around in circles and dying. And those bugs are a food source for many beneficial predators that eat mosquitoes. So if you look at Boulder City website, they have scientific evidence that shows that when you push the ecosystem out of balance, it causes ripple effects, so spraying can actually have far more detrimental effects on dragonflies, bats, birds. Anyway, it's also interesting to note that 2017, the spraying was August 30th. This time was the 19th. Makes sense. We had a lot of wet weather. But in both cases, the test results went below the threshold before the spraying occurred. So if you need any more evidence of why you should not spray and just put your money into larvicide, that would be it. And I also noted that the slide on the amplification showed a woman out in a tank top planting in her front yard, and the best protection is personal protection, right? So if you're going to be out at dusk, wear a long sleeve shirt, wear repellent, wear long pants. Don't expect to be outside in a rural area at dusk and not have mosquitoes. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak for public comment for the issue? Okay. Seeing none, is this Zoom capable? Anybody interested in speaking there?
There was nobody that raised their hand.
Sure. Okay, so I guess we'll just close public comment. Start, discussing board option-wise, some comments. Just Trustee Butler, did you want to go first again?
Sure.
Having had some recent information.
If I may, Mayor Pro Tem Grace, and I'm sorry to jump in, Trustee Butler. I think from my perspective, I think there's some simple questions that it would be helpful if the board considered and potentially answered if that's possible tonight. And if not, and we feel like we need to do additional research or study, we can do that. The first is the board or are the trustees comfortable not spraying under any condition? Is that the preferred approach, whereby the board would not make a decision to spray regardless of West Nile virus index or any of that? That may be an appropriate approach from your perspective. As staff, I think I've shared this with you before. I shared this at the last meeting. I'm not prepared to make a recommendation to you based on epidemiology or entomology. That's not our wheelhouse. And so, our recommendation, generally speaking, would be if the board is comfortable with spraying in limited circumstances, what is the appropriate threshold? And I don't know that, again, I'm not sure I can make that recommendation to you with confidence, although, as Director Gonzalez pointed out tonight, Laramie County recommends 0.5, Fort Collins utilizes 0.75, and I think to some success, and their vector index is climbing and has been for weeks. They've had to implement spraying activities this summer, and they're spraying again, I think, this week. But under those conditions, maybe that's a policy that Fort Collins has spent a lot of time and energy and money studying and putting in place. So, for me, I feel like it's a question of is the preference of the trustees, or at least the majority of the trustees, to not spray at all, or if certain conditions are met, that we would initiate, an application of adulticide. We do have a very robust larviciding program. I think we should continue that. I don't think that's an issue here. I think everybody agrees that should continue to be our general policy and approach. And I don't know if you have the answer to that question tonight. I'm not saying that you should, but I think that is a question we need to answer before we dive into all the really specific details of what an appropriate threshold might be.
Okay. So essentially, should we spray at all? And if so, what that threshold is, and just kind of leave it at that number and we'll kind of build it off of that, or?
I kind of feel like, we can take a no spray approach. The city of Boulder has a no spray approach generally. They came in 2018, or a representative from the city of Boulder came and shared information about their policy at the time. They're the only ones I know of that have kind of a formal no spray approach in our area, immediate area. But as former trustee Hyman pointed out, the vector index went down before we sprayed, based on our trap data. So it's possible that that's a reasonable approach. I don't know the answer to that question. Certainly understand the information that's been shared by the public health folks tonight. An elevated vector index certainly indicates that there are going to be West Nile virus cases in your community, right? Especially when you get to that 1.0 level. And we saw that. There's at least 2 confirmed cases, I think, at this point of West Nile virus from Berthoud. So that doesn't mean that those are severe or that they are, fatal cases. We don't know what that looks like. I don't know any of the specifics of those cases. We just know that that certainly has occurred. But again, if the board's preference is to not spray at all, that's a different discussion, I think, than, yes, we'd be comfortable spraying under certain conditions, and then we need to decide what those conditions might be. And I have some very specific recommendations about what I think that would be, what would be appropriate in those conditions if that's what the board wanted to do.
Okay, I guess bring it back. Good on the line, if everybody's all right with that? We'll start with you, trustee Hughes. Spray, no spray? What's your
May I
take?
ask our guests another question that I thought of? Do you have any information as to when there are 2 cases in Berthoud? Do you know at what vector index those cases were contracted?
Yeah, so the first reported case in Laramie County, the specimen was collected on August 15th, which was a week before the vector index reached 1.1. The second case is still under investigation, so we don't have details on that yet.
So 1 week before the newest test was collected.
So it was collected on a Monday, and then that following Monday was when the vector index was 1.1.
Okay, and
And
the
for
case
clarity,
was,
maybe you guys don't, we didn't really talk about timing. The traps are typically collected on Tuesdays, and we receive test result data on Monday the following week. So if the specimen was collected on Monday, the traps that indicated the West Nile virus index of 1.1 would have been collected on the following day, and we received the actual West Nile virus index test data that Monday following. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I think that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And keep in mind, people migrate too, so
Yeah.
just because they're in Berthoud doesn't mean they got it in Berthoud.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a tough question. And I think I don't like the idea of pesticides in general if we can help it. I understand that there's a health risk with that mindset, but the thing that I think scares me the most about the system as it is set up is the fact that the spraying was basically useless this time because it had risen to an inappropriate level. I understand that it was becoming a dangerous level, but because of the timing issue inherent in the testing, we never know if the spraying is actually going to be useful or not. It seems to me. And so I'm hesitant to just give, I guess, blanket ability to spray whenever the index is X, whatever that index might be, if it's 5.75, whatever. I'm hesitant to just say, yes, we should do this, or allow staff to just go ahead with this without really understanding what it is when they spray. Because my concern is that this will happen again. It will continue to happen in that unless there's it's horrible to say, but unless there's an outbreak of sort of catastrophic levels, we don't know if spraying actually does any good based on my experience with this most recent test. I'm also incredibly concerned about the fact that the adulticide used, I'll be specific, the adulticide used gets rid of all bugs. That seems to me environmentally unsound, and I understand that we're trying to protect the population to a certain extent, but I don't think that in that case the benefits outweigh the long-term dangers of getting rid of bees, dragonflies, other healthy mosquitoes, possibly getting this pesticide on plants, vegetables, soil, tomato, water sources, etc. I don't know the long-term damages, and I hesitate to make short-term decisions for short-term gains when I don't understand the long-term dangers. That's kind of my.
Sure.
If I may, just briefly, and I don't disagree with anything you said. I only want to offer this for clarity for everyone involved. And for what it's worth, I have my own very personal opinions about this subject that I don't think are relevant, that I won't share. So I don't want you to take what I say as argumentative at all. When you use the phrase that kills all bugs or gets rid of all bugs, that's not the case. That wasn't the case when we sprayed 2 weeks ago. So it does, that's not to say that it doesn't impact insects, and I think the test, the data is clear that it has an impact on insects. That's what it's designed for, right? It's designed to kill insects. And it has an impact on other living organisms. But I think it's important as we discuss this policy that we talk about it in as specific as terms as we can, and not to make a general statement like it gets rid of all bugs. And I know that's not what you intended,
Yeah.
but I just felt the need
Sure.
to kind of point that out.
Yeah.
Hope
No.
you understand.
And I will amend my statement based on that, right?
It's
A large
certainly
number,
designed
a
to
large
attack
number of
insects,
different
absolutely.
species besides the ones that are targeted, which
Absolutely.
is, to me,
That I don't disagree with at all.
and so I guess for policy, I would support suspending spraying, and if in the future, I think the only compromise that I would be willing to make is that if in the future the town wants to spray, I think there should have to be a decision made each time if we do decide to spray or not, as opposed to just making it a blanket number that triggers. But I don't like that,
Yeah.
but that's really the only thing that I would be.
That's your truth, man. You rock it. Sweet. Trustee Murphy? Spray, no spray.
Just to give you guys some background, I do have some experience in the field. My past work experience involves work with the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, as well as the City of Boulder OSMP. Largely, my job responsibilities revolved around trail building, but a good portion of that job was also resource protection and management. In all of those locations, it involved limited use and controlled use of herbicides and insecticides. I am not a fan of using insecticides or herbicides from a nuisance standpoint. They should be something of last resort. But I think we need to follow the science on this and also be open to changing information as it comes to us. So as far as a no spray versus a, policy that says we spray during certain circumstances, I'm not in favor of a blanket ban. What I am in favor of, and give this credit to my wife, who's a plant scientist and currently negotiating with the EPA over the use of this for farmers currently, that we want to really focus on basically the right type, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. So I'm certainly open to amending our 2017 policy in a number of ways to make our applications more strict, to give staff more direction on what they should be doing. And, I know it's tough to look at a situation like we had last week where we clearly exceeded the threshold. But then we come back and we're at zero the next week and we sprayed for seemingly no reason. But you also have the flip side of that is, a lot of times you'll see exponential growth and you'll have the opposite. So these are things I'm open to discussing with you guys, but as for a blanket ban, I'm not in favor of that.
Trustee Sorcelli, your thoughts?
I'm very much in agreement with the other things that were shared. I have a very interesting perspective on this because when I was 16, I contracted West Nile and I got really sick. And to the point where I had a headache, like a migraine headache for weeks on end, and I thought I was dying. I mean, it was brutal. So I remember that and I survived that and that, you know, I'm fine now. But it makes me think of others and what they would go through if they contracted the virus. And so if it is going up, I think of what can we do? I am not a fan of chemicals or spraying or anything that affects our environment negatively, especially if we are trying to be more organic and have a garden spot. So I am very torn about this issue. So I think there's, for me, some clear things that are obvious changes to policies that we just, you know, discovered. I think the town did what they follow. I believe they followed the policy that they had before them, and they did a great job of that. And we wouldn't have known the vector index was going to show differently the next day. But we are showing West Nile cases popping up again too. So it's not as though there wasn't a reason to spray. But I'd like to see more prolonged testing show an issue of concern before we take action. And also, I'd like the town to be able to weigh in on the decision to spray. If we have the entire town show up and say, please do not spray, then that would give us pause to say maybe we don't do this, or our threshold needs to be even higher because people are asking for another option. And I'd like to explore if there's other options at the larvicide level, and I don't scientifically understand any of that at all, so I'm not going to play scientist. But if there's more at the beginning preliminary levels instead of the adult level where we're spraying the whole town, I'd be more a fan of that. But I see long-term effects and concerns being issues with spraying, and I would lean toward not at all until we have a solid policy in place that we all feel comfortable with and can live with the consequences of it. That, you know, I think it's ironic. This week I had 2 bats fly into my house. It's terrifying, but it kind of keyed off when former Trustee Hyman was standing up there, and I was like, is there an environmental stir? You know, are things going a little bit, you know, are they troubled because they can't find food, right? I don't know, but there's something keyed off to me that we do need to think about the long-term effects of our decisions that we make. It's not just, hey, there's a trigger, let's pull it. What are the long-term consequences? So I'm a fan of revising the policy, setting higher standards, longer testing periods before we do anything, and then having a point where we look at the numbers from county and say, people are getting seriously ill, we have to take some sort of action. We can't do nothing. So, but then we would make sure that we're communicating with our whole community so they have weigh-in and then have ability to cover their gardens, close their windows, take action that they feel is best, and we support them in that in whatever way. I don't know if that's
Sure.
confusing or helpful.
Makes sense. So essentially, you want to severely limit it or essentially turn it off until we come to an agreement of what it's going to look like. So not anti-spraying, but more along the lines of we're setting that threshold super, super high.
Yes.
Okay.
But also being mindful of watching what's happening with the virus.
Yeah, everything within
If a lot of people are getting, contracting it, and there is no medicine or cure, and it was concerning.
Horse medicine's really easy. Trustee Butler, any your thoughts on it? Spray, no spray?
I guess, first, I have a few questions. From a town's perspective, high level, what is our due, because this is a conflicting, topic of trying to decide a policy that has pros and cons. So where does from a liability or legal or just duty to serve our town residents, does that coincide with public health, safety versus property rights versus environmental impact? Do we have like a priority? Because that's what I'm personally debating with is, is where that balancing act is at. There's obviously, gonna be pros and cons in every one of those categories, so for me to decide today of, yes or no to spray, I don't have enough information, I don't know enough about this to make a stance on it, to be quite honest. I tend to agree with Trustee Murphy I'm not comfortable with a definite ban. I could support a moratorium until we come to a policy that we agree with to. But I'm going to come back to this question of how do I judge that balancing act?
Not to sound flippant about it, but that's exactly what you're here to do. And I, that's the really hard part about making public policy, right? Is that you're trying to balance a variety of factors, and 7 of you have to agree to that, or at least the majority of those 7 have to agree to that balance of factors. And so I don't even know that in this case that I can recommend. Sometimes I think it's really obvious, right? Like when we have this is a bad example, right? But like, if there's an intersection that's clearly designed poorly, we already know that something needs to be done. There's some really obvious problems there that can easily be solved with best practices in engineering design, right? I mean, like those are really simple. This, I think there's a little more wiggle room. I mean, I think, I think the science is, there's a clear correlation between West Nile vector index and the number of cases that you're going to see. Beyond that, I don't know what any of that means, honestly, as the town administrator. So to make a recommendation to you about the health policy, I wouldn't be comfortable doing, and frankly would defer to Tom and his staff. And that may not be a policy that the board is comfortable with, and that I totally respect and can appreciate. But for me to say that I know that spraying is bad, or that I know that spraying is important and helps stop the spread of disease, I can't say those things to you confidently as the town administrator. So either of those things.
Let me ask.
That's a tough situation for the town to be in, and we typically do not make public health decisions. We defer to the public health department at the county.
Right. I don't know if any of us are qualified to make the decision either. Does spraying violate any property rights?
That's an interesting debate. I'm not sure I'm prepared to weigh in on. But I think legally the answer is no. I mean, this, adulticide application is made all over the United States all the time. And if it was a property rights issue, I think it would have been dealt with already in the courts. I would assume it's been going on for decades, right? We all have the story about riding the bike behind the mosquito truck when we were kids, right? And I grew up in Houston, Texas, where they sprayed every week. And so, my assumption is that there is no legal issue with property rights. It's not that you can't make that argument. Well, I won't bring that debate into this either, but similar arguments have been made recently about similar public health issues.
Sure. What else can we do in a preventative measure? Obviously, it sounds like we have, I don't even know what our larvicide, program is to detail. But in addition to either that or other measures, can we support other efforts?
I think that we have one of the more aggressive larviciding programs in the area. And that is as a result of, actually, it's funny, I don't know why this didn't click to me. I've reread this motion from 2018 like 10 times trying to decide really what was the appropriate path forward. And the motion the board made at the time, it was a 4-3 vote, was to continue the practice of non-spraying for the remainder of the summer season unless the vector index reached 0.75, in which an emergency meeting would be called of the town board. And then in addition to that, review the larvicide program in October, which we did do. We did not review the entire mosquito spraying policy, but we did expand our boundaries. So we will larvicide within like a half mile of the town limits for property owners that are willing to let us do that. But our contractor, which is VDCI Vector Control Disease International, they do our larviciding program. They go out every week. They check areas of standing water that are known. They also look for and identify other areas that have come up that may not be on our normal route. They check for the presence of mosquito larvae, and then they apply larvicide. And so we do that in a pretty wide area. And again, we doubled the budget for larviciding back in 2018 as a result of that change. So, and I think generally speaking, I would assume that's part of the reason why we haven't had a vector index over 0.5 since then. But I have no idea if that's true or not. In just the same way that I really don't know, I think obviously the vector index came down before we sprayed on August 19th. So that I know. I don't know if the vector index would have gone back up had we not sprayed. I really have no idea, right? That I can't say for certain. And so, larviciding is kind of similar. I don't know if that's what's keeping it down. I just know that we haven't had a vector index over 0.5 since we expanded our larviciding program.
Do we need to revisit the larvicide program?
I don't think so. I don't know that there's much more we could do there. The larvicide contractor has pretty clear instructions to go out and find any areas of standing water that they can apply larvicide to. They have a regular route in places where there's always standing water that they go and deal with. And then they, like I said, they're proactively identifying new areas that come up or temporary areas that show up. And so I don't know what else we could do in that realm. We could ask, but I think they would probably tell you the same thing. We're doing about everything we could do from a larviciding perspective.
Okay. Okay, thank you for those responses. At the moment, I don't feel comfortable making a policy tonight.
Sure.
This is just where I stand. I'm happy to gather more information over time. I'm not ready to ban indefinitely with any policy. I think that's.
So more information is needed. Okay.
And it may be that, if I may, and I don't want to cut off Trustee Hardy because I'm sure he has things to share. My suggestion, for what it's worth, and you can take it or leave it, is that we basically take that policy that was at least in the motion in 2018, that was kind of for the remainder of that season, and put that in place permanently until another policy is adopted if the board so chooses to do that. That would put the threshold for some kind of spraying decision that needed to be made at 0.75. It would also place the decision to spray on the town board and not on town staff. We're fine with that. I hate to say that because it sounds like we're passing the buck, but I think we're all of the same opinion that I don't know, 0.5 or 0.75 is the right threshold. I suspect that in that condition, we're going to hear the same kind of recommendation that we heard from the health department tonight. I would expect to hear that if we're 0.75 or above, that they would recommend that you spray, and then you guys would have to make that decision and vote. But that would be a reasonable interim condition, I think. That would be, and by interim I mean permanent until such time as you changed it again. And so I think that would be my recommendation to you tonight for what it's worth.
Which in itself is a policy.
It is, and we would need to come back and bring that policy to you formally to approve. I think we'd rescind the policy from 2017 and adopt this new language via resolution. Or modify or amend the original policy to state exactly what I just said.
So in that scenario, with the lag in collecting samples, getting the test results, triggering an emergency meeting, us deciding to spray or not, maybe a question to Laramie County Public Health, that's adding time. Is that even applicable, relevant?
I think it's a risk-based decision, right? I mean, I think, I don't want to speak for Tom, but I think the way he's kind of said it to me is once you're at a vector index of 1.0, you already have cases of West Nile, or at least the data would indicate that that's probably the case. So.
Yeah, that's, again, Tom Gonzalez, Public Health Director, thank you. Great conversation. It's not easy decisions. And I want to start off with, we are your health department. So the way it's structured in Colorado is the local public health agency. is bound to work with our unincorporated and incorporated areas to be your public health agency. So we serve you, and we want to be here for you to help you answer those questions. And the concern always when it's a public health issue, you have to react quickly. But you were able to put your special meeting together real quick and be able to make a quick decision. So then if there was an opportunity to spray, to do adulticiding within that weekend, so we would minimize the risk, great. Hopefully we're gonna have cooler nights. Hopefully the Culex are not at that breeding ground. But ultimately, we'd love to have come back, get all your answers, or questions answered, I should say, and make sure you have that comfortable position there that then you can look at that further. I always suggest too, if you're on that 0.75, look at the weather next week. We can see where we're at. I do agree with you. You can have that conversation. It isn't black and white. When you get over 1, that's typically what we do see. You're going to have human cases. But again, it's how quickly you can get together. It seems like you guys you put your meetings together quickly, and you're not delaying the response. I also would say there is a lag, like any disease. The incubation period with West Nile virus is anywhere from 5 to 10, 14 days. So when you're seeing human cases, that's from prior. So if you want to spray later, we've already missed the window. So that's always a challenge with any disease. We saw the same thing with COVID, because you're always lagging for symptoms and, of course, hospitalizations. I hope that answers.
Okay. It does, thank you.
Trustee Hardy, do you think you might have something to say about this?
Oh, I've got lots to say about this, but I'm going to keep it short because a lot of you have already said it, which is great. So one thing I love about our town board meetings is that we learn a little bit more about each other every meeting and where we stand and how we feel about things in our community. It's kind of a great coffee talk, but a coffee. I do agree with all of you. I'm glad to hear a lot of support, I think, for where this might be heading. I could debate some of the things that they were saying out here that I disagree with, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to agree with all you guys had to say because you said it well, and I don't think I really need to say anything more other than I definitely hope it goes in the direction I think it's going, and I do have a motion. But I have 2 questions before I read it, and that is question number 1, 0.75 or 1.0.
Well, I think if we're kind of tapping back to the 2018 interim policy to put that in place at a future meeting, that was there. So that was the 2018. But if we were holding that, then that would be the current standover until we come back and see it again. We could change to 1 if we felt the need.
Okay. I'm just looking at the number of times we've not ever hit 0.75 or 1.0. So
Sure.
either works well for me pretty easily.
Sure.
So, and then the next question I would have, based on what I've written down for a motion potentially, is 2 consecutive tests or 3. And I've got kind of a wiggle on that too.
2 consecutive tests to trigger spraying, or 2 consecutive tests to trigger a special meeting?
Exactly. You're on the same page right there. Well, I've got it kind of written the second way.
So 2 consecutive tests would trigger a special meeting, at which point we would get to decide whether or not we would spray based off the information at hand.
Correct.
Maybe, if I could suggest, maybe a hybrid to that would be if there were 2 consecutive tests over 0.5 but less than 0.75, that would trigger a meeting. If there is a test over 0.75, that would trigger a special meeting, just 1.
Because ultimately, do we want to pass a motion on this tonight? Do we want to have this come back to us here in a couple weeks?
My motion contains that too.
What doesn't this motion have?
I'm trying to cover all the bases because I'm learning from the 2018 one it didn't stand up. So, but you still have comments to make too, don't you?
No, I mean, everybody here is coming at this reasonably. It's hard to hit a moving target, especially with a week delay. Nobody wants anybody to get sick, but at the same time, the spraying can cause a lot of unintentional damage. So we're having to approach this very cautiously, very diligently, and I think we're doing our best with the information at hand with this meeting in particular. So I'm not disagreeing with anybody here. I'm mostly just making sure everyone's comfortable that we're passing a motion on this instead of just having it come back to us in 2 weeks with this proper motion fully filled out. That's all I'm asking.
Well, just another comment I have is I find it really ironic or weird how we battle West Nile, which is kind of a neurosystem disease in humans, and we fight it with a chemical that causes neurosystem issues with bugs. Gets them disoriented, fries their brain. It's like fighting fire with fire. So I do find it kind of interesting how we fight the West Nile virus. And then just on my whole concerns about using synthetic versions of the so-called, everyone says, oh, it's an organic treatment, but we don't use organic methods. We use the synthetic man-made methods, and then we make a cocktail out of it. Because I remember one time asking Brooks about what they put in their tanks when they go spraying. She wouldn't divulge everything that was in her tanks other than 1 or 2 chemicals, but nothing more. And I felt that was kind of non-transparent and made me really suspicious of what we're being exposed to. So anyway, there's a lot more comments on that whole thing too, just from past experiences of being on that side of the dais as a citizen and then getting on the town board to finally making a change. So here I am, second term, going to make that change again, hopefully. And if anyone else has any comments or questions, I'd love to make a motion.
For some reason, I hesitate to make a motion tonight because, or a policy, I guess, tonight because I just feel like there needs to be more information that sets that standard of what that threshold is for us, and I want to hear more from the community. Like, this was great for us to be able to talk to experts in the room and for us to feel like we can ask those questions, but I want to hear more from gardeners and people in our community that have other perspectives as well. And I know, and the perspectives here are great, but I just feel like there's more, in order to make a decision or take action, I feel like I need to know more myself. And I want to make sure that we're mindful that what the chemicals, long-term effects of the chemicals, also knowing what they are, and having that really fully divulged to us, I think is really important before we ever spray anything. But also really keeping in mind the health effect, the consequences on our public if we don't take any action. And we need to have that conversation too, and talk to people that maybe have had effects. I have a lot of discomfort with this topic because I feel like we're not ready.
We're fighting a health issue with another health issue, and that's the big contradiction with this whole policy or process of, we're trying to, and how high of a level, what is your risk level of getting West Nile compared to other diseases? We have ticks in town, but yet are we doing anything to treat ticks for Lyme disease? People get Lyme disease in town. I know a few. But did they get it when they were here in town, or did they get it when they went hiking to Carter Lake? That's the whole thing about this. Mosquitoes and people migrate miles at a time. And we can't just rely on this, someone's birthday got West Nile. Well, did they get it when they went to Florida last week when they went to Disney World? Or did they get it in Fort Collins or in Loveland or over in Will County? We can't pinpoint that. And we just got to overlook at our whole environment. What are we willing to do in our environment? Are we willing to take self-protection and take it upon ourselves as individuals to protect ourselves from this disease, which I think has much greater value than broadcast spraying, a shotgun effect, hoping that we hit the target. We've already proven, I think, to all the other communities in Laramie County, when you get our test results back each week from Keith, look at the birthday numbers compared to everybody else who's doing mostly spraying. Our numbers always seem to be consistently best in target. Everybody else is spraying more frequently than we are, but yet we doubled up. We doubled down on our larvicide program. And I think that says a lot, and I think other communities in the county should be looking at us and talking to us, and we're setting the example of what we're doing in this town. And I really feel like the Berthoud's been a leader in this whole West Nile control, and taking care of our environment and encouraging pollinator gardens and being the garden spot. And, you know, just, I don't want to go backwards. I want to keep that level of expertise, or not expertise, but level of expectations up there, you know, protecting our environment and taking it as a health concern, but why create another one? So,
Sure.
I think that we need to give staff direction tonight, again, like we did in 2018, and make it a little bit more indefinite so that if we do forget to not bring it back in 3 weeks, that it's still there indefinitely, and you know, say, hey, we gotta bring this and make it an official policy and not just a motion for tonight.
And could I hope that if we were to pass a motion that would trigger a special meeting, that it would show up more often in the citizens' minds and it would show that this is an issue, because obviously it's been an issue since the 19th and we had one speaker tonight, right? And I want more community feedback as well. I'm grateful for the health department to be here because that was wonderful information, but I do want to see the concerns of the citizens, and I think that if a policy that were set tonight triggers more communicational opportunities, that might in the long term be better than setting a policy, than forgetting about it for however long it takes us to set a future policy.
I agree tonight's motion is more of an interim policy until we get a permanent one put in place.
Okay.
I appreciate that perspective of creating something that creates a time frame where people can have weigh in when we do make a decision, so that there is something going forward and not just a big question mark going forward. But I think something that states we're going to create a window where people can openly communicate and we can make an effective decision when the issue arises again.
So it sounds like we have 3 possible choices here. So we have option 1, which is we stay the course and do nothing, wait for staff to come back with the full policy, but we don't touch it. Option 2, we enact the 2018 policy as a holdover, but leave it on indefinitely until we get a new policy that we can approve. Option 3, we go with your policy, which is 2018's policy, but a little bit bigger, but it does the same thing in general.
Sure.
So it sounds like those are the 3 options we have right now.
If I may make a suggestion, if Trustee Hardy's prepared to make a motion, he can do that. And then if there's somebody that feels like that's a good approach and can second it, then you can take a vote.
Yep.
If he doesn't get a second, then somebody else have to make a motion, or you guys just won't make a decision.
Revise my vote motion.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Any opposition to it? Have democracy win out on overall? Okay.
I'll be more conservative then on my motion and go from a 1.0 to a 7.5 or 0.75. Okay, here we go. Let's see if it sticks. I motion to rescind the 27 mosquito spray policy not to spray in the future unless the vector index exceeds 0.75 in 2 consecutive weeks of testing. Then spraying will be addressed by special public meeting of the town board called to order by the town staff on whether or not to spray or not based on the current factors and conditions around current testing and to keep our existing efforts of larviciding in place.
Is there a second?
I can read it again if I said it too fast and stumbled.
Okay.
Could you read it again?
I just saw the looks on some of the others, and I was like, okay, I know I don't speak really well with that. I motion to rescind the 2017 mosquito spray policy and not to spray in the future unless the vector index exceeds 0.75 in 2 consecutive weeks of testing. Then spraying will be addressed by a special public meeting of the town board called by town staff on whether or not to spray based on the current factors and conditions around current testing and to keep our existing efforts of larviciding in place.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
Can we slightly modify that first part of it? Where you said to not spray unless 0.75, I would prefer it say to trigger a meeting,
Oh, that's kind of what I said.
conversation about spraying.
2 tests in a row, back-to-back testings have to be 0.75 or higher. In that case, town staff will not call for a spray, they'll have us do a special meeting, which I forgot to put in there. Well, I guess a public meeting, it'd be a public meeting. So it'd be open to the public to come in and discuss whether we'd spray or not. And then town board would make a decision on whether or not to continue spraying, or maybe continue and wait for a third test to see if it changes or corrects itself. It's kind of my thinking behind it.
Would you be willing to amend that to Administrator Kirk's 2 times above 5 or 1 time above 7.5 that triggers a meeting?
I think the 0.75 I'd follow the Fort Collins model. And not be as extreme as the Boulder model, which is 1.0.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. A motion by trustee Hardy.
Verity, did you modify your motion consistent with what Carl said, or did
Yeah.
you second
No,
his
I
original?
kept it
I seconded his
0.75.
original.
Just
Second as is. Okay, so we have a motion by trustee Hardy, seconded by trustee Ayers. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
No.
President Grace,
Yes.
trustee Butler,
Yes.
trustee Sarso,
No.
trustee Ayers.
Yes.
Okay. So this will be temporary, essentially, we've done away with the 2017 policy. This is the new policy that we'll be implementing, and we can revise this here in the not-too-distant future in accordance with better information, is kind of what I'm gathering,
Permanent.
to make it a full permanent.
Yeah, I think my suggestion would be that we'll bring you back a resolution formalizing the policy that was just articulated. And then if you don't want to adopt that, then we can talk about where we go from there.
Okay? All right. How's everybody feeling? Good to keep moving? Or you need to take a break?
Rather
Need to take a break?
keep moving.
All right, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. meeting back to order. Picking up where we left off, we are up to item number 6 on our agenda tonight, the First Street Corridor Plan, also introduced by Administrator Kirk.
I'm not going to talk for very long. First, I just want to thank Roger Sherman from BHA Design who's here with us tonight, who's going to walk through all 3 of these next 3 items, the First Street Corridor Plan, the 3rd Street Massachusetts Avenue redevelopment, and the I-25 roundabout design. BHA Design is working on all 3 of these projects. The First Street Corridor Plan has other consultants, including Plan Tools, who did our comprehensive plan. But this is just an opportunity to get in front of you tonight, share some of the progress on these 3 design projects. It made sense, since they're working on all 3 of them, to do it all in one night, and then to get some feedback as appropriate about the directions that we're heading, and make sure that we're all still going in the right direction. So I'll turn it over to Roger again. Thank him for sticking around. Originally, this was going to be the only 3 things on the agenda, so.
I learned a lot.
You got to see
Yeah, well, it may affect our design in these other projects too, so. Well, good evening. As Chris said, I'm Roger Sherman. I'm with BHA Design, and we are just one consultant on the teams for these 3 projects. And 2 of the projects we've been in front of you before to discuss. The First Street project, this will be our first time in front of you. And so we've got a little bit more time set aside for that. And then, and I'll try and get through this quickly so we have enough time for discussion. But if at any time during my presentation you have a question that you'd like to ask, please interject. Let's keep this kind of like a work session, and we'll try and get through it as quickly as possible. But so the first, as I mentioned, the first project we wanted to talk about tonight was the First Street Corridor Plan. And then we're calling the second project the Lovejoy District, based on, I think, some of your comments at the last meeting. And then the Berkeley Gateway at Highway 56 and I-25. So moving on, the First Street Corridor project was one of the projects that was identified as one of the maintaining a strong community identity priorities as part of the 2021 comprehensive plan. And the purpose of the plan is to identify present and future needs and opportunities, and to establish design preferences and strategic priorities. So in the comp plan, it was one of the areas that was identified as a potential growth area. And so we want to kind of get ahead of that process and create a framework or vision for that corridor before that development pressure increases. And so we started the process back in May. And we had our first public meeting on July 21st. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in one of the upcoming slides here. But now we are starting to develop plan concepts, and we're very early in that process. And we wanted to come before you and share those early ideas before we go to the next meeting with the community, which is coming up here on September 14th. So that's where we are right now. We're hoping to be done with the entire process before the end of the year, and there will be another public meeting in October before that as well. So we've got a couple more chances for the community to have some involvement as well. So as I mentioned, I just want to tell you what we've been up to here. We toured the project with town staff. We all got in one of the town buses and drove around together and talked about possibilities, opportunities, challenges associated with the project. And then we also had the community meeting, as I mentioned, in July. We created a project website that all of the information we're developing through this process is posted, and there's a link to it on the town's website. We posted a traveling exhibit in Town Hall, which maybe you've seen at times, just notifying people that the project is occurring. And we mailed notices to the community members for actually town staff did for the first community meeting. And Northern Water's been generous enough to allow us to host all of the meetings in their boardroom. And so that's been great, what a great space to do that in. And for the first meeting, we had 32 attendees. And actually, it seemed like more than that. That's how we signed in, but it was a really well-attended meeting, it seemed like, and got a lot of great feedback, which I'll share with you tonight, some of that. And then we reviewed the opportunities and constraints that we had identified and asked for them to kind of share their thoughts too. Talked about some visual preferences, which they gave us feedback on. And we had a large strip map of the entire corridor that filled 2 tables that people were able to kind of put sticky maps or sticky notes on and tell us about their concerns and ideas for the project. So it was a good meeting, and then we're starting, as I said, to develop preliminary plans. So these are the opportunities and constraints maps. I know it's a lot of information to digest really quickly, but I'll just highlight a few of the things that we talked about as both opportunities and constraints. And one of the biggest challenges, I guess, is the railroad tracks. And it creates a real separation or a barrier, not impenetrable, but it's limited in its ability to cross that railroad. And so we're really trying to, we see an opportunity at some of those crossing points to really emphasize and strengthen that connection between both sides of the tracks. We also see an opportunity, and it's just something that we've noticed, and I'm sure a lot of you noticed, that the interchange at 287 and First is incomplete. It really only has 2 motions, and so we wanted to explore and see that if that was a kind of a phased implementation of something that's got a larger vision. So we're starting to have those conversations. We haven't gotten answers yet, but we're working towards that. The North Heartland JPO also shows the Colorado Trails Plan shows a possible trail along the railroad tracks in the future. And so that's that connection or something that's similar to it is a great opportunity throughout this to not only we talk about the east-west connections, but also connecting the community together in the north-south direction too. There's also I think it was Chris or one of the other town's staff members that mentioned the idea of preserving the opportunity for businesses to enter the market in a less expensive way. So what we're thinking about is the opportunity to create different standards for high visibility areas and lower visibility areas. And so that businesses can sustain themselves running the market at a lower cost in those areas that are high visibility on those maps. So there are quite a few other items, but just in the interest of time, I'd love to hear your thoughts too as we get through this. These are the visual preference, 2 of the 5 boards that we shared with the community, and we asked them to place green dots on the photos they liked. And what we did here, just to make it clear which were the highest, received the most support, is we've added a red box around those. And so we had categories that related to commercial, industrial, both high and low visibility industrial, mixed use, residential uses, live work, local street intersections, and you can see in that case they were kind of preference towards these bump outs and kind of more pedestrian-oriented intersections, and then the arterial street intersections, it seemed like there was a real strong preference for roundabouts. So that's kind of interesting. And then the bike lanes it's interesting because a lot of these ideas were supported, and some were really stood out as big favorites. And the buffer bike lanes was one of those kinds of that had a big support. Pedestrian trail crossings, we also arterial streetscapes, all of the concepts here were more bizarre kind of approach, and we got a lot of great support for all 3 of those images. And then also local streetscapes, linear parks, which we'll see why we have linear park images in the collection as we go through this, and the green infrastructure, things like rain gardens and bioswales, those kinds of things that are getting integrated into the streetscape. And then the last board addressed things like gathering spaces, signage and roads, and off-street parking. So it was fun to see the feedback we got, and we ended up using a lot of these images, the preferred images in the plan that we developed, much like the comp plan. So as I mentioned, we have this map that covers close to 10 feet long and covered 2 tables in a meeting room. We transposed the community comments here onto these images, and some of them range from things like, it'd be nice to have maybe incorporate an amphitheater or a drive-in movie theater and beer. There were questions about sanitary sewer capacity in the area, which has been kind of a new issue that's come back for some of them. Comments about running First Street to not becoming something like US 34 and Eisenhower. I think this bigger comment down at the bottom of this page was about character of the architecture, wanting to be more farm-like rather than industrial. It's interesting, these are all one person's comments, so it's tough to know how the broader audience will, but it's an interesting comment. Everyone saw that, I think it's called the Jackson parcel, is a really huge opportunity in this corridor that the community, it's one of the larger parcels that really doesn't have a lot of existing development on it, so it really seems like we could help create a vision for that, but maybe the developers would get excited about it, and we could help kind of steer that in a direction that the community and the developer might support the landowner. As we kind of moved further south, the comments were very focused on site constraints, especially riding width and the fear of riding the road and what kind of impact that would make on the adjacent property owners. Like a lot of them have existing parking very close to the street, and sometimes even in the existing right of way. And so to widen that street might impact them. So we had a lot of conversations about what could the street cross section be narrowed down, maybe get rid of a median in these kinds of areas so that we could fit all of the travel lanes, the bike lanes, the sidewalks, all of those things in a narrow section. Which I think that's kind of a direction that we really think is important. We can't just ignore this and try to emphasize that fact. We have comments about realigning First Street around the new subdivision to the east of the subdivision, and actually some interesting comments about semi-truck parking, but there are really very few opportunities to park semi-trucks in this industrial area, and that some people are considering using their parcels for that and kind of renting spaces or much like a VRBO for the night or something like that. So it's a land use that we should consider in this process. The Franklin and Turner are big semi-truck turning areas, and that street section and all those turning movements need to be considered when we think through that kind of access. So I won't go through all of them, but it was great to have that kind of feedback on a very granular level about certain topics along the corridor. We also we thought we would compare what we're calling on modifying trends to the existing trends, and so we looked at the existing zone, both town and county zone, and this is the different zoning categories are highlighted on the right. But so if we were to do anything, the uses were developed in this way: the purple being industrial uses, the red being commercial, the green hatched areas is agriculture, and then in the county, and then R2 residential, the yellow hatched areas kind of around Sunny Slope Reservoir in that area. So that's one possible direction things could go. If the land is annexed into the town and developed kind of along the lines of the current plan. Stepping back a little bit to the comp plan, this area was identified as the Innovation District, and there were two uses that were predominant in the comp plan along First Street: the Innovation District and then the residential. And the Innovation District was really focused on creating a distinct work environment that helped to attract, cultivate talent, bring different kinds of businesses together that improve networking, and we see the recent preferred land uses there, and the scale is looked at to be 1 to 3 stories, which is a good range for the kinds of uses that may happen there.
Incubation District allows some residential to be blended into that. So things like woodworking, it's a mixed use. And so when you're looking at the land use plans that I'll share in a minute here, keep that in mind that there's a blend of those kinds of things that are possible. Urban residential is just kind of the opposite. It was primarily residential, but also has the ability to blend in some commercial uses to support those neighborhood uses. In this case, we're not thinking about single-family homes being visible from First Avenue, that might happen for use. So the kinds of uses might be more like the things that are shown here. These are all different types of residential uses that are a little higher in density and might feel like they're an appropriate neighbor for the industrial uses across the street. And we're thinking that 2 to 3 stories in height for these would be is kind of what the comp plan said, and that idea is being carried forward here. With that, I'm going to just walk you through 2 quick concepts here for the land use and some other ideas here. So this modified terrain concept A is pretty aligned with what the comp plan showed. And what I mean by that is that the Incubation District uses jumped over to the east side of First Street. And then the urban residential started east of that. And so this plan shows that. So first, let's see if I can. First Street is highlighted here in the double kind of pink lines going north-south. So this is 287, and the Mountain Avenue is down here. So this is the existing gateway roundabout. We're suggesting another gateway on the north end. And then the symbols in these 2 yellow symbols represent a more pedestrian-oriented crossing first. And camera 10 is envisioned as more of a vehicular corridor because it has a continuous east-west connection paralleling Mountain Avenue and not obstructed by the lakes. So it seemed to make sense as a more vehicular-dominated and I should say dominated, I should say prioritized. There'll still be bike lanes on that street, there'll still be pedestrian pathways, those kinds of things, but those two streets that go east and west of Unwin and County 10E that connect to the 2 lakes would have more of a pedestrian emphasis and bike emphasis. So there might be slight variations in those street cross sections, and even the setbacks along those areas. We're not quite to that stage yet. But and then the red lines represent internal local streets within the area that connect both across north and south and over to First Street, just to provide connectivity throughout. That doesn't require you getting back on the First Street, so that's an important thing to help disperse traffic. And a lot of these things are common between both concepts. The biggest change between the 2 concepts is land use, so I'll highlight that. So I'll spend a little more time on this concept than the other one. 4th Street and a future potential street east of the Innovation District and east of First Street are shown here that again have a more pedestrian and bike mode priority. And we've also shown a linear park next to that, creating a north-south connection east of First Street. And that was actually a great idea that generated through our early discussions with town staff, and it's kind of a neat way to bring the community together and connect and make more connections throughout this area. So a lot, like I said, a lot of those things are common to both schemes. And so I guess I would say that this concept A preserves the most land for commercial, industrial, and employment uses out of the 2 concepts. And I guess I'd say that just to think about townwide, what other opportunities there are available, and how, and if there's a priority on industrial here because of opportunities scattered throughout town. So as you can can see here, I'll just flash between these a few times, but the biggest changes for the Jackson parcel between Laramie and Kilo 10, the Water Avenue, and around the east side of First Street was reaching urban residential in that area too. And the thought there was that because that Jackson parcel has so much opportunity, we thought we would explore this idea of maybe connecting the residential neighborhoods to each other across the tracks. And so that was the thought for the Jackson parcel. And then First Street could be used as a transition to the urban residential. That could be the dividing point between innovation district and urban residential. Instead of the linear park, which we're talking about east of First Street. So I think it really comes down to the priority or the importance of preserving innovation, industrial, commercial use, kind of tax generating property versus connecting neighborhoods. That's really the big differentiator between the two. Not that the neighborhoods won't be connected, there'll just be a less direct physical relationship between the neighborhoods. So as I mentioned, we're going to take your input tonight, update the concepts if there's some things you really would prefer to readjust before the next community meeting. We'll have that next community meeting on September 14th at Red Water, starting at 6 o'clock. I shouldn't put that on the slide, but and I'm hoping we get a good turnout again there and get some good feedback. And then again, we'll update concepts based on that, have another community meeting, and finalize the plan in early 2022. So that is a quick summary. I can go back to these concepts or anything else if you'd like to talk about anything specific.
So I suppose in the interest of time, so we need to make a motion to extend it past 9:30. Do you guys want to combine questions and comments about, I guess, less pontification, more just kind of, this is what I was envisioning, and we can go from there. Anybody have anything you want to start with?
I can start. Sure. Just looking at the plan, I think it's excellent. I think it hits most of the main points. The only amendment I would make would be Water Avenue sees a lot of bike traffic from my experience. So if we could maybe adjust that. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to more public commentary, but I think you guys hit this one out of the park. So, yeah.
I'm not sure which we're taking about Water Avenue.
I noticed we've got on here kind of roadway vehicle model priority and stuff, and maybe, I don't know if there's a way to put a priority on biking. I mean, it's certainly not a pedestrian route right now, but a lot of people go out and bike that road.
Okay.
So, just a thought.
Okay.
Small comment.
Okay, and I do know that one of our other team members who's attending virtually is taking notes.
Gotcha.
Capturing all this stuff, right?
Until you just said it was up there and over again. Yeah.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Anybody else comments or questions?
I think it looks good. I like the mixed use in both either the urban residential or the innovation district commercial. I think that's important for the higher density areas because they kind of take some of the stress off of just having all residential or all commercial. And I think that assuages some of the issues that districts like this used to have when it's just commercial and high-rise. So.
Yeah, that was one of the real, I would elaborate too much, but the comp plan, that idea of character districts in the comp plan was all about that, trying to make land uses as long as the character is complementary and it's a good mix. So good, that's something that's supported.
Sorry, something else. On the one comment that was talking about the style of buildings, I am also concerned that if everything that is built within the past 5 and continues to be built within the next 10 years around the state is all modern farmhouse,
it's going to get tiring really quickly and it's going to get dated really quickly. So in 20 years, they're going to say, oh yeah, that was built in 2020. So that's so post-COVID. Right? So I would just like a little bit, at least, I like that comment. I would like an understanding that maybe spread it out a little bit, because I think one of the benefits of living in a rural town is that everything tends to be a little bit more eclectic. Yeah, very good. Yeah, and the timeline that the development of this corridor will happen over a long period of time. And I think we will tend to see this document probably being after we work the corridor the next 20 years. Definitely really far.
This is landscape. I think concept A personally, I think that one's great. I'm a big fan of the idea of getting 287 and County Road 1, the first street specifically, being able to turn left. I think that's actually impossible. Dale Earnhardt would be very upset with us because of it. But otherwise, once again, you guys just start around the park. Anything else?
So you said something about the First Street and 287 connectivity, so it says no finished read. And you can comment that you can't turn left and come south if you're going north on 287 already, and you can't really turn left and go south on 287.
Yeah, you can go north from the first north right on 287, or you can go south on the south. So it's just like every 2 minutes.
Because I know for a while there, they did have it blocked off because people were turning left off of 287 south on 4, and they had bollards in there to block that middle lane. And then I've actually seen people stop in that acceleration lane and turn left to go south of 287. Kind of freaks me out every once in a while, but usually they go up and then turn with the next street and come in. But I've seen people.
You can't get as a turnaround spot?
No, we just can't miss a turn, but yeah, I've actually seen people go up that ramp on the 287, slow down, look over, and then slow over and do it.
Yikes.
But yeah, it is kind of interesting, but it's not a big problem. But there are people that probably think the same things.
Any other comments, questions?
I do like the idea of creating an environment for lower rent, or at least affordable business shopping. Yep. So, someone went on a cute little coffee shop in that intersection. Just kind of, I think taking the Jackson Fund, really taking that upon ourselves to develop it complete as one whole big package rather than a bunch of hodgepodge, like let's sell this line and get a bunch of varieties that you don't fit in there. Make it a nice industrial, well, not industrial, but a better industrial zone versus what we have.
There you go. One of the things I have taken, it's only been sitting still for 20 years.
We lived down South Second, and it's just kind of a mix of stuff, and it doesn't match, and some of it's old, some of it's new, some of it's not well kept, some of it's pretty run down. Some of it's wild, some of it's been Second Street's not a pretty street, and it'd be nice to pretty all that out and get it all consistent. Make it shoppable and presentable, and not make it look like, I don't want to be in this part of town.
I just had a couple of comments. I appreciate the layers added based on community feedback and the connectivity. I feel like that just makes it a lot more, like I can really envision this tying into the town instead of being an isolated industrial area. And so I just really appreciate that. I see it being functional, like actual business and commerce flowing through there better because we're connecting trails and bike lanes and things like that. So thank you for layering that. It helps with the visual. And I would love to see the trail with the railroad track, really see that come into fruition because that's a missing connective piece. It never really occurred to me it's limited turning going into 7 there, but so for whatever reason that doesn't bother me, but I guess that confusing people that aren't familiar with the area. And then I appreciated the more industrial architecture as opposed to the farmhouse. I mean, I don't know, I can't say it as well as trustee Ayers, but I think that's missing from our community is that modern industrial feel that's also commercial. I think if we overdo one type of architecture, it's not as
dynamic. So I think that the pictures, the visuals were right on with what I think we've been looking at up to this point, and I think it's gonna look great. So, thank you.
I would give a few comments. Are you looking for direction from us today from concept A versus B? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, any feedback, anything you'd like to share?
Okay, so concept A with the Jackson property, that's all currently labeled as high visibility. Would it stay that way, or because I agree that we need some quote more affordable, lower visibility options with lower standards. If we stay with option A, I think west of Second should be a lower visibility. That's my comments with that. And keep the high visibility just along the frontage of First Street. I think that the changes to the 287 First connectivity and allowing all access to all directions, I see that as very important. Do we have any feedback from CDOT?
I think our approach in this plan is that we want to both consider that as being an option in the future and to identify that as a priority for us, not that we would be doing that in the near future.
Sure.
But we don't want to eliminate the possibility, and we want to treat that as if it's a full new interchange, because I think that changes the dynamic about what may develop there in the future also.
Right. I think that's a big factor. So I think we have to leave that option that open in the space there available to accommodate that. Because businesses thrive off of traffic count, and that is a big factor to swing either way. A big factor in my opinion. Other comments that I have is, and this is going to be true for all the different plans we're looking at today. Greenery, trees, planter, just obviously this would be larger scale type stuff. I still think having tree lawns is relevant even in this district on First, as well as possible. I don't know how you would accomplish it, but like some just sight lines and some scalability, or primarily the lakes to the east. Maybe at the two reservoirs there. Mm-hmm. If there's a way to make that feel birthed agricultural, to allow some sight lines from First to those reservoirs, there's a pretty close proximity. I think that would be great.
That's a nice idea. I think as things develop, it may be most possible along Bunyan and King. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. As you think about these 2-3-story buildings going up along First Street over time, I think if you'd like, we could, I guess that's an option we could look at. Could we create some parks or something that connect all the way, or open space or something within the plan that connect all the way over to First that would be undeveloped, that would create that kind of a broader sightline into those rushes. I think that we'd have to incorporate something like that to really make that happen.
Yeah, I think you have to go 3 stories. I think that makes sense, but you don't want just rows to make it feel too tight, constrictive.
Yeah. Okay. I think we can definitely explore that possibility. In fact, I think we should try and get that into at least one of the concepts before the community meeting, if that's something you guys know about.
Absolutely.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because in any way, shape, or form contacted the railroad about possibly adding some sort of spur or some sort of something on the railroad there with these big properties?
So that is something that Walt has talked to the railroad about on multiple occasions. Existing spurs along that route already. Getting another one would be an interesting, unlikely challenge.
Beautiful columns, those spurs, because you'll see those trains just go back and forth and everyone's stuck, hours, because, Schools they're great for infrastructure, they're great for industry, but they are terrible for commute times.
Yeah, but that's why this being parallel to First Street going out of town, they wouldn't be nearly as big of a problem as blocking like Mulberry.
287.
Yeah.
So one thing I will bring up though, just briefly, and I don't know if we've actually talked about this a lot, maybe we have. We've talked about it internally, I just can't remember if we talked about it in the context of this plan, but with the idea of full-range passenger rail, Mayor Karspak's been involved with, and I don't know if it's gaining any momentum or not. If there were a passenger rail corridor along the railroad tracks somewhere in the future, the Jackson Industrial site, to me, there's an opportunity there potentially for a stop and some transit-oriented development. I think that we could fit within the context of the Innovation District. That would be my only reason why we would not take the Jackson Industrial site and make that kind of low visibility adjacent to the railroad tracks. But that might be one kind of last undeveloped site that could be suitable for some kind of transit-oriented development. If that, timing coincided in the right ways. And if it didn't, but it developed in that kind of high visibility innovation district kind of way, but with the idea that maybe there's a stop there someday, that it would be easily adjustable if we hadn't built a bunch of kind of lower cost and less attractive industrial properties. So I agree, that's a great idea. That'd be an awesome place for a train station. So just something to think about, and who knows what that looks like. Maybe it's a high order that everybody's shooting through back in the I don't know, but whatever.
Get off there, go to work, grab a bite to eat, or commute out of town or live in town.
And there's some great kind of transit-oriented developments down in like Lone Tree area. I think this site would lend itself well to.
Sure. And it's close to 287. So we could go to 287, going to the train station, catch a train.
Is there anything else? Is there anything you need from us?
No, that's exactly that feedback. Perfect. If it's okay with you, planning to show two concepts to the community, or is that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Alright, so it sounds like we're done with item 6, then we're moving on to item 7.
Sorry. With that suggestion about trying to reserve that one section, would it not be beneficial to keep that high visibility commercial as opposed to concept B, which makes that entire area urban residential? Would it be easier?
I think either one of those would be fine in that condition, urban residential, 2-3 story product. I think the Innovation District would probably be a better fit in that condition, but I don't know. I mean, and maybe that's something we really need to kind of talk through and consider, but that's a good point.
No comment.
Yeah.
Alright, sorry, that's it.
Sure. One more thing. Moving on to item 7, also introduced by Tony Kirk, the 3rd Street, Massachusetts Ave Redevelopment, also known as the Lovejoy District, apparently. I'm just going to turn this straight over to Roger. You guys have seen some of the initial concepts and already provided feedback, so I just want to share kind of where we're at now.
Sure. All right. We've seen this one before, so I'll just kind of give you a chance to skim over this and we can come back and look into it. Thanks for the last meeting, and right now we're talking about design and construction budget with staff for phase 1, and we're not sure if phase 1 could include everything we're going to show tonight, but we're kind of targeting a $4.5 million budget. We have been developing plan concepts which we'll share with you tonight. Those include things like parking, street configuration, intersection treatments, turning analysis, and reach all those things. We've also started doing some research about the BMSF Railroad right-of-way, which we're finding out encompasses all of 3rd Street, right up to the buildings. And so the process, once we get to kind of preliminary approvals, could be a little bit more long, take a little bit more time, be a little bit more costly than a typical project would if it wasn't in the railroad. So we'll highlight some of those issues as we get further in this process, but this is something we've just kind of gotten some records that confirm that. We've been looking at different portions of the street differently, and I think we talked last time about, we shared plans with you last time that had diagonal parking on one side of both Massachusetts and Berlin, parallel parking, and then diagonal everywhere. I think we ended up with kind of a hybrid plan that should includes, in this case, the 500 block, between Massachusetts and Mountain, reverse diagonal parking on the west side. It's just striped, so if it doesn't go well, we can always change that later. A parallel parking on the east side, a vertical curve on the west side to keep vehicles from backing into storage and or damaging trees, those kinds of things. But then a flush curve on the east side to kind of tie that during events, kind of a plaza kind of feeling into the park, and have a kind of a nice smooth transition between those two areas. So that idea is carried forward. There will be corner treatments, gateway elements leading into the space, and street trees, lighting, those kinds of things that we're just starting to get into. But yeah, we have a splash pad right by the historic depot, and the Lovejoy Tower is also the current plan. The 600 block, we're adding, converting that block to one-way northbound traffic. Instead, it's two-way today. That allows us to have a sidewalk on each side next to those historic buildings, plus some parallel parking on the side, about 7 spaces there. And then we're also showing some gravel, I'm not sure what kind of surface you get, maybe recycled asphalt on the east side of the historic buildings between the tracks and those buildings. And some other details here. But the nice thing that these changes do is create a lot more space for people. That road is overwide today, and with the current plan, we have an 18-foot wide sidewalk on the west side of 3rd in that 500 block, 26-foot travel, 2 13-foot travel lanes, and then that sidewalk on the east side, could vary in width, and really, even without closing the street, you could set up tents and things like that for a festival in that small space, and along that edge, and even on the west sidewalk. So, it's amazing what a few feet of extra sidewalk do for a place to attract people. Massachusetts, there's similar kind of a concept there. Right now we're showing Nile parking on the north side, parallel on the south side. Where we ride the sidewalks. Right now we do show parallel parking in front of all of the bay doors on the right side. And so that's a conversation that we can have with them to see if that's an issue in losing parking spaces. We're hoping not to lose all of them, but if we provide access to one of those bay doors, not all of them. So anyway, more to come on that. And the 4th Street, Massachusetts intersection is being enhanced with bump outs and crosswalks and special pavement corners. And we're going to extend all of those street trees and lighting them down the street as well in the treatment. So that really is an exciting possibility in this area. Similarly, the existing sidewalks in this area tend to be 11 feet wide, and with these changes, we can get up to about 13.5 foot wide sidewalks. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it really enables you to do that without doing things like that. And you have to shovel it and still have a space outside of those. And hopefully over time, it doesn't mean it'll have to right away, but it'll be enable that kind of use if that ever happens. The alleys, they're about 20 feet right now, and that varies a little bit. There's some existing obstructions that kind of make it tighter in spots, but we're thinking about special paving. We'd like to encourage more rails on buildings to create a little bit more interest in that. In those alleys, festoon lighting, potentially benches, power pots, all of these things we've listed to try and help them appear more like pedestrian spaces, but they'll still be very accessible to service vehicles. And really, something that would be nice to do is to consolidate trash enclosures, so that we've been closed in and really high all of that, and that really helps too. So we'll have to talk to a lot of business owners about that possibility. So the thought here is that we may not be able to do this everywhere, but create some community zones. You've probably seen the alleys in Fort Collins, Laramie, some other cities. We're creating a little space for furniture, fire pots, lights, things like that on one side of the alley where it makes sense, and then tying lights to the build festoon type lighting typically adding those things to the buildings. And here's just an example of one for a common, so you can kind of see how that, it's not uncommon to kind of narrow those areas to protect the buildings, to provide people spaces, and other amenities. So it's an exciting prospect. So this is just a little enlargement. We were just telling them to keep moving back. I think one of the things that everyone will be interested in is how these changes affect the availability of parking. And so when we talk we'll have this. So the bottom line is that with the changes we're talking about, the existing quantities are 89 spaces in those 3 blocks. And with the changes we're talking about, we'll have about 100 spaces. And we also have the lot south at 130. Underutilized, I guess I would say. And so that's another great opportunity to actually sometimes having parking spread out that helps all the buildings in the area to have people walking by them. So I don't always see that as a negative having to walking downtown environments. We're also looking at good long-term drainage improvements. This area does not have a lot of great existing underground drainage. And so we've been working with Wilson, who's the civil engineer, who's been working with town staff to try and figure out the best approach to do that. And so the lines highlighted in blue.
Take advantage of this opportunity to look at all of the, since this project will most likely tear up the entire street, this is a great opportunity to replace existing aging utilities. And so we're looking at all of those possibilities. We're also looking at turning movements. We know truck access and delivery is important for a lot of these businesses on these streets. So we're wanting to make sure a semi-truck can make all of these turns with possible exception of that 3rd Street northbound turn from every direction. That's that little one-way piece that we talked about. But they will have the ability to go make that corner in both directions at Massachusetts and 3rd. Really quickly, we're just trying to see if this budget that we've talked about, that $4.5 million, makes sense for the project. And what we did is we compared it to another similar project in Greeley that a contractor recently helped us prepare pricing for. That was only a 1-block project, and that came out to about $39 a square foot for that project. That wasn't in a railroad right-of-way. It didn't have any CDOT connections to mountain, those kinds of things. It didn't include other things like design costs and things like that, but it's a great comparison anyway because a lot of the improvements were similar. So when we apply that number to these different parts of the project, we come up close to $4.5 million here. But as you know, the pricing has been all over the board lately in the construction world. So we think we need to set this up as a kind of a phased project and we might bid out all the components in the first, when the time comes to do construction documents. But they might be broken out into pieces like this, so you can say, all right, well, we're just going to wait on the alleys or whatever the lower priorities are, and build the higher priorities. As I mentioned, we're going to be reaching out to abutting property owners. Probably going to be a virtual meeting to try and get as much attendance as possible. It's hard for them to get away from their shops. We're going to prepare the 30% plans, kind of refine all these ideas, costs, define those costs, and then use that information to try and identify those phase 1 improvements. And so this is kind of setting it up for maybe a budgeting process for the town and maybe grant opportunities and those kinds of things. Then the construction documents will be prepared, and who knows, construction could take place possibly in 23 and 24 if everything goes, continues on this, or it could be, the timing could be different depending on the town's priorities. So that is all I have on that one. Any questions?
Yes, I've got one. I know there's been talk in the past I've been involved somewhat with the train station use.
Okay.
Some of my things. But anyway, I know the railroad really limits what they can do to the train station, especially on the track side. because they don't want anything going on over there, and they suggested that the building be moved a few feet. So has that been analyzed as to
Not yet. We are.
what would it take to move that building, and how far would it have to move to make the railroad happy that we could do something on that east side to like be able to, like, I mean, it seems like they're critical about painting it or even putting windows, and it's like, no, you can't touch that side. But I don't know how
That's
far
a
they
good
would want to
comment. I'm
move.
glad you have that experience because we need, that helps to know that. And we haven't asked those questions into the railroad. We've gotten to the point of figuring out that we're in railroad right away and that even they own that building and they also, don't they own the Lovejoy elevator as well?
They own the land under the Lovejoy.
Yeah,
Okay.
they own
But
the
they don't
land,
own the
but there's an
buildings.
existing ground lease and someone else owns the physical building. I think the same is true with the depot. But I
The
could-
depot's still owned by the train station. They lease it for $1 a year with a handshake lease. No one can find the actual lease to the Lions Club, but everybody knows it's just $1 a year to the railroad. But I know that there has been comments that if they wanted to do anything on the east side, like open that door and make that door usable on the east side, or even put back in the old platform, they wouldn't allow that because it's too close to the tracks, and they suggested that the building be moved slightly to the west so that they could do things on that east side of the building. So just a thought to maybe, hey, what if?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great comment.
But that's my only comment. But
Yeah,
I like everything else on there.
Any other comments or questions?
Oh, I've got one more. I just thought of it. It's freaking- You know, the tracks are still there in the grass.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be kind of fun to put one of the pump carts there and people could like ride it back?
Indiana Jones style? Yeah.
Just something to pay homage to.
Right.
My only comment is regarding parking, and unless we can confirm that we can put those additional lots in to the east of the grain elevator, I would not want to take out some of those diagonal ones on Third Street there, just because those are used a lot already. So that's my only concern really, is making sure that we don't take away any parking until we have procured additional and effective parking.
Okay, yeah, I think if that's the town board's feeling in general, that's an easy change to make.
You know, parking's already so limited down there already.
Yeah.
We don't want to be definitely taken away. We
Yeah.
definitely want to be adding.
There are other opportunities, I guess, I'm not, I don't want to sound argumentative at all, but I'm just, I think the reason we talked about that is because we are trying to create this kind of seamless connection between the street and the park with this flush curve. And the parallel parking works better with that kind of an idea. I think if we go to diagonal, we may want to use a curve so that the vehicles backing or pulling into those spaces are kind of, we're protecting that space from that, so, which is not a
Absolutely.
huge change, but it's changed. But, and the other thing was that we're able to create more pedestrian space by the park to give a little bit more space back to the people. So that was the thinking behind it. But that,
Well, and I
you
do
know,
appreciate that vision, and I think that's really creative and innovative for use of that space to make it more pedestrian friendly, because it really isn't right now as it is. And so I think it does tie in better for people to move back and forth and mingle on that end. So I don't want to discredit that vision either. I don't know if anyone else has feedback on the parking situation, but when I saw that, I just was like, I feel like this is going to be one of those topics that people are going to be like, why did you get rid of parking?
Yeah, that's full. The Third Street's always full, it seems like, especially on the weekends.
Yeah.
Wasn't one of the compromises that there was a possibility to put diagonal spots on Fourth as well? I know that's a block away.
Yes, that would be probably better.
Trustee Murphy, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm happy to see all these ideas incorporated from last time. I'd certainly like to see the surfacing finishes and materials that are proposed and kind of how that affects kind of the dynamic of the downtown. And then just last of all, regarding phasing, are you looking for more of a prioritization? Do we want to split it in proportionally?
I'm guessing we'll be back in front of you again after we've actually done a cost estimate based on this design. Like we're kind of projecting that really cost to this project, but there are a lot of differences. So I think I think maybe once we come back and actually have more specific costs, we could have that conversation with you. But if you have a sense right now of what the priorities are, yeah, I'd love to know.
I don't know, from my perspective, I feel like third would be the priority, followed by, the alleys in Massachusetts. That's my opinion on the situation, but, I think it'd be very helpful to just see that breakdown in cost between the different proportions of the project to maybe help with the prioritization of that. It's hard to look at that big figure as
It
like
is.
a comprehensive plan, but I think once you break it down, you can maybe work through that, so.
Trustee Butler, any comments or questions?
I love the concept. And there obviously is parking concerns that we're gonna have to address down the road as it becomes more challenging. I like the concept of preserving the parallel parking on the east side of Third, though. I know it does remove some spaces with the assumption that we can gain spaces in other areas. I loved that idea the first time I saw it years ago, I think, when you presented it to the planning commission. Again, trees, greenery, planters, hanging pots and so forth, highly encourage. And prioritizing, Lower Third Street is, in my opinion, the priority. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks.
Did you have any, or you already went? Make mine real quick. Are there gonna be bollards placed on both areas so that it could be in theory sealed off and used as an entertainment district?
Yes.
Nice.
So the thought with necking down, let's see, I'll go back to this enlargement. Necking down the intersections is that we could create kind of some vertical elements that may have barriers integrated into them that we could swing closed or just put up temporary barriers for that. There are a lot of options there. But it's by narrowing it down, you improve the pedestrian connectivity and provide an easier, smaller opening to have to protect there. So yes, that's important. Then there will be bollards, especially if there's no, on this edge where there's no curve, there will be bollards, lights and trees that kind of create a repetition along that edge and a kind of a visible separation between pedestrian areas and the street. Sure. It's an important, and there will even be some ADA things that along that edge. So yeah, I agree. There's a lot of details that that are hard to see on this, but I think all the things you mentioned, like flowers, trees, hanging baskets, all of that street furniture, all of those things that animate and activate space will be part of that plan.
Nice. I guess last question I've got regarding this, when it comes to priority, I know about a decade or so ago in town, they tore up Mountain to go and do a whole bunch of stuff, but it was 2 years in a row. Mountain Avenue was pretty much out of use for most of the summer. Lesson learned, if we're gonna do roads, we gotta do all of it at once, because otherwise coming back and doing the same thing next year is everyone hates it. So in terms of priority, if we can get all roads and anything touching it at once and we have to close, that would be my wager, but otherwise everything's great, looks amazing. Sweet. So I don't think you have the ability to get through this next piece in less than 4 minutes with questions and comments. That said, is anybody wanting to put forward a motion to briefly extend the meeting for however long we need to do, say 15 minutes, 10 minutes?
I'll be quick.
Make it done by 9:45? All right, Trustee Murphy?
I'll move to continue the meeting past 9:30 to complete the last agenda item, and if there's any additional discussion after that.
I'll second to get her done.
All right. If you clerk, can we get a roll call vote on that, just to extend the meeting? Or we just go say yes to everything, or,
You guys could all just.
Say aye.
Aye, yeah.
okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're gonna keep going.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
last step.
All right, I'll be quick. So you've seen this one before a few times, I think, and so the budget for the yard is $350,000, 1.65 for additional stonework, signage, landscape, lighting, those kinds of things. Right now, we're preparing some plans. The preliminary approval's been given by CDOT for the art. The artist submitted their structural plans, signed and stamped, got the thumbs up. And I think that's not a formal approval. The special use permit is actually the approving document, and that's kind of the next step as we get all of these other plans finalized. But we're working on preliminary landscape plans, getting proposals for electrical and lighting plans. We already have the irrigation consultant under contract, and then getting a contractor on board, or a consultant on board for the water and meter tap design. So these are those structural plans I mentioned. No need to really spend a lot of time there, but I think the biggest change here is that the older plans showed landscaping extending pretty far around these roundabouts. And after our last discussion and conversations with town staff in terms of maintenance and priorities, we decided to kind of really concentrate everything right around the roundabout. So that's the reason I wanted to show this plan. The other thing that I wanted to point out on this slide is that the distance of the two roundabouts from the interstate is much different. The east roundabout is about twice as far from the interstate, and you'll see why I say that here in a second. So the designs are very similar. We've just kind of updated some of the renderings using a different software that gives them a little bit more nice look. I think even the slides I shared with you earlier in the week, we've added a few more here. So this is a view from I-25 looking at the east roundabout. So the point here is that we've always wanted these to have a nice visual presence along I-25, and I think this kind of shows that it will. It's of a nice scale and size, and even the materials being that kind of metal reflective will kind of highlight that on both sides. I don't have a shot like this of the roundabout on the west side, but it's closer, so it feels even more large and are present from the highway. So this is the east roundabout, as I said, kind of approaching from the northbound outbound ramp. And I'll just kind of run through these really quickly. We've been working on orientation so the sign is as visible as possible, tree locations, all those kinds of things to frame things. View looking again kind of from the I-25, but a little closer to the roundabout. And we're trying to keep the landscape really low maintenance and really plains, so it's really mostly native seed, wildflowers, and maybe a few shrubs, but really plains kind of a look within the roundabout. Approaching the west roundabout under the bridge, you can see the stone retaining wall surrounding that. The signage, this is from the southbound off-ramp. So the signage is oriented towards both off-ramps. Oh, one question I had for you too. I actually we showed the signage two ways. One says welcome to Berthoud and one says Berthoud. I personally just like Berthoud, but that's a question I wanted to ask of you, of the board. So the concepts are very similar. We're just refining heights and the grading and things like that, working with the artist on placement. So we are, as I mentioned, kind of going to be preparing the final plans, getting the special use permit, and construction. We talked about starting the art installation this fall, but in conversations with town staff, Chris in particular, thought it would make sense just to wait till spring so we can get the landscape. It doesn't really make sense to install the landscaping over winter. So we thought, let's tear it up once, do all of the traffic control, lane closures if there are any that are needed all at once. Same comment about closing roads, do it all at once, and do it all next spring. So that's the targeted tentative schedule for construction. That wasn't too bad, that wasn't too long, huh?
No.
And I think we could incorporate some mosquito testing sites probably.
Actually, what we're talking about, the pollinator, we put a pollinator garden in the middle.
No, we just turn off the sculptures and the bug lights so they zap.
Oh, God. No, CDOT doesn't allow lights because apparently people and moths are interchangeable when it comes to attention span.
That's true.
Any questions or comments, thoughts, insights from anybody on the board on the 25 roundabout artwork?
The signage would be a
How
good
many
one.
monuments use welcome to our town versus just our town?
You know, it's common.
Because I kind of like the
Both
welcome
ways
to
are
Berthoud.
common, I would say. I wouldn't say there's, you know, I mean, I guess if you look at northern Colorado, Windsor's sign at I-25 just says Windsor, Fort Collins sign says Fort Collins. If you look up and down I-25, Westminster just says Westminster, Thornton just says Thornton. But those are bigger cities
So we
too,
could say
right? There's-
welcome, and we could look like the nicer, friendlier
Right.
I was
town.
gonna say, I
That's-
feel like welcome to Berthoud's the more rural, quaint,
Yeah.
welcome
Yeah.
to our cute
That's-
little town
yeah.
thing. So
Not
I
nice
kind of
to,
like,
be compared to other communities. It
kinda
just
like
make
it.
us extra nice.
That's one of the things I like about your interchange. It feels more welcoming in small town, just because of it's not a big bridge that's being celebrated. It's kind of the space around the interchange.
Well, we're one of the few that we actually go under the highway, where most of the others are over the highway,
Yeah.
where we used to be over the highway, but that's a whole other story. The Channel 7 just did a story on why the flip-flop, but I like it. I like it better under the highway than over.
Okay. All right.
We'll do a quick like arm vote. Who wants welcome to Berthoud? Put your arm up. We'll just measure it that way. Welcome. Okay, so we got 3. Oh,
Yes.
Yeah,
4.
let's
So we
go
have
for
4 for the
There we
welcome to Berthoud. So you have the majority.
All right.
Okay.
Any other
I have
thoughts?
a question.
No. Yeah.
Lighting, is that gonna be plugged into the grid, or is there possible to put solar power for any sort of lighting? And second question, sorry, go ahead.
I would say that it's very possible. Clanton is the electrical engineer who's going to be working on it, and they've done all the lighting for the project for CDOT. But we could talk to them about, I think the placement of their solar panels is going to be really important. We don't want them to be obstructing any of this, so maybe we
Sure.
could put them outside of the roundabout. and
Well, there's
so-
the parking area close by,
Right.
right, that they could
Sure.
possibly run cables from there.
Yeah,
And my second concern is thinking of exiting onto the airport road. How bright are the lights envisioned to be? Because moths, right? I don't want people like looking at the light and then driving off of the interstate.
sure. So the artist, if I'm hoping I'm describing this correctly, but the artist concept for the lighting is that there are 3 stones that are kind of placed vertically, and the idea is that their lights will be placed on the inside face of those stones, kind of, you know, those inside edges, lighting up the sculpture. We're talking about ground-mounted lights for the retaining walls and the signage that would just be wall washing those stone walls. And that light temperature, it'd be nice if we were in the warmer range, the 3000 Kelvin, you know, rather than the bluer, cooler range. And so I'm thinking that's kind of what we're headed towards. I had a question about, you know, do you want these on all night? Do you want a motion detected? I mean, there's all kinds of options out there now with lighting. They can, when there's nobody driving through, it can lower the light levels 50%. I mean, there's just all kinds of ways you can save energy and still have a little light out there. I guess it really, and you could, some of them could be different, like the sculptures could remain fully lit all night long and everything else could be cut back, or the opposite, you know, I mean, it's just, so
Also,
lighting is
kinetic energy from the bridge vibrating. Take that, put it into a generator, generate battery power to then power the lights. I mean, if we can capture wave power, we can capture the wave power of that bridge.
Wow.
Oh,
I think that,
See,
across that
right.
bridge.
CDOT's got some words to have with these.
Okay. I'm thinking upgrade stuff.
How about Christmas lighting?
Sure.
Well, I asked them about that when they brought this to us. Like, could we put different colored lights on it so that way, you know, come autumn we could turn it orange, come Christmas it could be Christmas color. You know, those cool ideas. And CDOT came in like the world's biggest buzzkill and said, no, fun allowed. All right, fine.
That's true for the actual lighting of the features. I think if we were to put outlets for the trees around the roundabouts on the outside and do Christmas lighting for those trees,
I think that's
I think that's a different story.
yeah, it's a great characteristic. Is that allowed? Because
I think we should, if that's something you're interested in, we should have a conversation with CDOT. It happens in Centerra all over the place, right? Along, I don't know about in CDOT right away, so we'll have to
sure.
kind of work through that.
Yeah, no, I
That's
think
of interest.
Just check CDOT on a good day.
They don't have good days too.
Catch them either before or after we vote on their next funding, see if they get any money.
Yeah.
But I love the idea, the statement that solar panels
Yeah.
make, and Windsor and Fort Collins lights at 392 interchange are solar powered. But that's a much smaller sign, so we'll just have to see how much solar.
Those sliding
paneling it
walls
takes.
on the highway could be solar panels.
Well, because they actually, not to get off topic, I'm sorry, but they've developed this sort of, never mind, it's not important, never mind.
I'm distracting Charles, all right?
Good little slap. Well, I mean, in terms of lighting up, and should that be motion activated? I think it'd be really cool. You come down into town, it's dark, and like the entire thing kind of lights up. Not spotlights, but just the entire thing kind of warms up as you're driving around it. Light like "Welcome to Birth It," and also the thing, the plant, the weed or the tree, whatever you go drive around.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible. If it is, I'd love to. I think CDOT's going to be a buzzkill about it, but if they won't, then I think that would be really cool.
It'd be cool to put those 12-foot skeletons out there. You can get on.
Oh God, those things are amazing.
Kind of light
Depot?
up just as you're coming down the ramp, so
Yeah.
they're going to get you. I'm all for that.
You can put the sensors, in different places for the motion, and set the sensitivity levels and all those things.
Yeah. Can we get in the budget 12-foot tall Home Depot skeletons?
Those lighting guys, I don't know if you've been out there recently, but there's a lot of lights already around those roundabouts. So we'll have to, I think we need to factor that in. There are streetlights just every 40 feet around the whole perimeter
Right.
of that roundabout, not in the island, but on the outside of the roundabout. So we'll have to,
lit for traffic.
yeah.
I just had a conclusion thought. I just wanted to say, with all the constructive criticism, to have these 3 projects moving forward and the visuals and the planning and everything that's going into it is really exciting. And I think it's been amazing being on the board and seeing these bigger projects come through that just enhance what Birth It is instead of changing it, but it's enhancing things that we haven't been able to before. And so I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, and the visuals are astounding. So
Well,
I appreciate you.
Getting a makeover.
We're honored to be involved. I mean, I agree. There's such fun projects to be part of.
So we're 100 years old and we're getting our first makeover.
It's not a race.
Getting rid of those wrinkles and getting lifts and pullbacks and globe talks and
When's the anticipated completion or project start for the artwork installation for this?
just that spring.
Spring?
Yeah, spring, it could probably be done sooner than that. I mean, the physical fabrication of it, but I think in terms of construction sequencing, it makes sense to do it all at once. But
Just don't let Tim slow down.
the artist is also trying to wait, because he's thinking the cost of stainless steel might come down. He's seeing the prices stabilizing a little bit right now, and he thinks it might even come down. So he's trying to time that purchase of the materials.
Sure.
We don't have these really amazing new sculptures in like a dirt pile either. So I think doing the two in combination makes a lot of sense.
Totally agree. Any other comments, questions, concerns from the board?
No, I'm ready to go home.
Ready to go home? Everybody else in agreement? Do you have what you need from us?
Yes, thank you.
All right, seeing as this is a special meeting, we do not need any executive reports. Go ahead and adjourn the meeting.